Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the War Report. Now, of course, we have myself, Constantine Martelli. We have GSP, my regular co-host, and returning for a third time, we have Gio Pancieri. And we have plenty of news to get into. There, once again, was one of these weeks where the last news item gets dwarfed by the next news item. So we'll start with the biggest and most recent one, which is the incident that happened on the Kerch Bridge as of last night, as the time we're recording this. We're recording this, just for context, the night of October 8th, 2022, and this will be out for the premiere date on October 9th, 2022. So, there was a pretty big explosion on the Kerch Bridge as an understatement. And this happened, let's see, it was around 12:30 a.m., 1 a.m. Eastern time, so that would have put it at, I believe, about 9 o'clock in the morning, Crimea time. And for those of you who aren't necessarily
I
in the know
think
about the,
six actually.
okay, um, those of you who aren't really in the know about the particular geography of Crimea, it is a peninsula. And the main disadvantage that has happened since 2014 after the annexation is there is no land connecting it to the rest of Russia because the land connection is in territory that's now controlled by Ukraine. Now, there was the annexation of the territories in what many would call Novorossiya, however, that still hasn't been fully secured, as we'll get into some of the news in the battlefield. But the main connection was the Kerch Bridge across the Kerch Strait. And the Ukrainians have been threatening to destroy this for years. Even before the war started, it had been a rallying cry of Ukraine to take down this bridge even before construction was completed. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, construction was completed about 2018, 2019. So that has always been a security risk. And more information is coming out about it. There was a hold on information at first. It didn't seem like anyone in Russia was willing to comment on it. The Ukrainians, although they haven't officially admitted it, they've admitted it in about every other way possible. And what it looks like now is the most recent reports I've seen, at least, and I'm sure you both have more to add to this, is that a truck carrying fertilizer was rigged up, but actually not to the driver of that truck's knowledge, because a lot of people thought this may have been the driver was sacrificing himself for an attack on this bridge, but it appears that he was an uninvolved party who had his truck sabotaged from this. Now, many people expected the damage to be major. Fortunately, it was not. And actually, as of 8 p.m. Crimea time, you had train and car traffic still continuing. The casualties of the actual explosion were relatively low in the single digits. The last time I checked, there were about five confirmed, with others injured. But although you look at what was actually done and how quickly things got back into operation, it is a string of PR losses for Russia that we will go into. While, again, you can assess the objective facts of the situation, you can address this and say, well, it actually wasn't that bad. It comes down to the matter of looking bad. It comes down to the matter of credibility, which, as I said, as we get more into the battlefield, there's been a lot of developments back and forth that GSP will have for you in his minutia minute. But the attack also coincided with Putin's birthday, and it coincided with some decent Russian defenses in Kherson, which once again we'll get into more detail
Hmm.
about. And
Yeah.
it does continue, and it almost does meet your prediction. I suppose we'll need a bit more to play out in this situation before we can say for certain about the Russians needing a morale boost before the second week of October. And I believe you actually said the 7th is a particular date. And it looks like, and to quote you once again, the Russians are doing more for Ukrainian morale than Zelensky ever could. And we're, we're
I got banned from the Slavian's chat. I have now been banned from six different chats because of my criticism.
well, I keep returning to this. You are too Slavic for the Slav chats. Your pessimism is just unmatched. You know, only maybe
But
by Strelkov, but I jest, I jest. But in all seriousness, it has been once again a series of Russia not being incapable of doing anything about these situations, whether that just be over the past month and a half or this incident in particular, but a seeming unwillingness for a variety of reasons, whether it be political consideration, whether that be oversights. So it does look worse than just in the incompetent Russia narrative that they want to push, because at this point it looks more like an unwilling Russia, a Russia that's too restrained to even take action to defend itself. Because you have them annex these territories are attacked, the AFU pushes in there, Armed Forces of Ukraine, and that's an attack on Russian soil. And then you have this incident, once again, another attack on Russian soil. And you want to even go back even further, and there's been more news about this. In fact, there was more or less an admission by the Americans that they were behind the Dugina assassination. You have that, a civilian well within civilian territory, well outside of the war zone, being assassinated, with the possible assassination attempt on another one, that being Alexander Dugin, her father. And it's just a string of these sort of losses, things that you would expect to embolden the Russians to commit more to this conflict, but the most we've gotten so far are the mobilizations, which still haven't taken effect. Now, once everything is said and done with those, we'll see what effect that makes on that. As I mentioned before, there did seem to be some at least holding the line and some repulsions, in that the Ukrainians may be stretching themselves a bit thin here. But with the recent attack, number one, that's morale boost. Now, even though the damage isn't as bad, that's still a supply line sabotage. They're still not going to be able to move as much through there as they were able to, which once again gives the Ukrainians another window of opportunity for an attack, for offensives, for counteroffensives, for whatever, before winter sets in, which, of course, everyone has been discussing for months, the implications of what that will be. But it buys them more time, which is fundamentally the entire point of these Ukrainian operations over the past 2 or so months. And they do seem to be successful, as we have documented, as many other people have documented on this. And this is just the latest in a string of that. And like I said, it's still developing, so we'll see what the proper response to that is. But people are finally speculating that the counterterrorism operation will finally be proclaimed, despite endless claims of that since about, August, even probably before then. And with all that being said, it's a game of waiting and seeing, and unfortunately, it's more egg on Russia as a whole's face, and Putin's face in particular.
Can I do some
Yeah,
vapid
go ahead.
cope right now?
Oh, okay, yeah, go ahead. That's why you're here. That's why you're here.
That's why I'm here. I think that a number of developments is interesting. I think that if anything, it's a mark based off of the troop numbers that have been pulled from Odessa. I believe almost all of the military Odessa from the armed forces of Ukraine has been pulled out to basically fuel men to these like Ukraine offensives, and from other places too. And let's not neglect Outomorsk. Oh, sorry, I mean Bakhmut. Sorry, Bakhmut. Sorry, not the Morsk yet, not yet, but we'll see. It'll be coming again, because the Russians, the Chechens and the Wagner group, they've been pushing forth into the middle of the city, and I believe the current offenses in Kherson that have been repelled are largely from Chechens, which is a sign that they are circling new troops into there, because they put them on ice all summer. But also, I think that this bridge, yes, it is egg on the face of Russia, but it didn't do materially a lot of damage. But I think the propaganda of it is the point. I mean, literally within a few hours of the attack, the Ukrainian post office had some, like, I don't know, quickly done digital artist render a fucking stamp. They're making a stamp of it. That's their like big symbol. And then you have, like, in the West, these, well, maybe I'll get into it later. But my cope would be that the Ukrainians, through their actions, it seems that the window is closing on them, that they truly feel the window is closing, and that there's been rumors here and there of major Russian strike forces that are going to counteract these offenses, especially in Kherson.
Oh no, I would fully
and who
agree
knows
with
what's
that.
going. Yeah,
In terms of that, it does look like an act of desperation, but once again, that a military superpower, let's just be honest, superpower in general,
Yeah.
can be hit like that, it does come off as weak. And once again, as you get into more of the details like that, in which case, once again, I do agree with you on that. Yeah, but most people, especially who are following this, even a lot of people who are in charge of making policy about this, aren't going to take those things into consideration, nor would they, even if they
No,
were honest
obviously.
enough. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, we all know what's at play here. I don't think anyone needs to be explained that, of course, there is an agenda here. But in terms of convincing the masses, especially the European masses, to continually
That's not gonna
destruct
happen.
themselves in order to support this war effort, things like that look good for the cameras. Things like that convinces the average German or whoever that, maybe intermediate blackouts or rolling blackouts are worth it if it means X, Y, or Z happening in Ukraine and victory for freedom and all the other platitudes that they throw out.
It's just like the war, man. My grandmother told me about the rationings.
Yeah.
You know the
I
picture
mean,
they had on. Oh, go ahead, Goran. Sorry, go ahead, Goran. Yeah, sorry.
that's okay. No, finish the pic. Didn't say. I mean, I didn't even start. So finish what you had to say about the picture.
Once again, two
I'm
Canadians
curious.
on a stream.
Well, I wanted to put a Telegram post about this, but yeah. They put the head picture on Twitter that they put to announce this bridge bombing. Which, by the way, now that I've heard that they've basically conned Timothy McVeigh style, they've conned that. Oh, sorry, did I drop a conspiracy there? That they've conned this driver into his death to explode this bridge with fertilizer bomb. Like, that's even more disgusting, right? But the picture they put on the head of Twitter to announce this bridge collapse, partial collapse, it didn't actually collapse, but this bridge bombing, is a picture of a person holding up a flailing Ukrainian flag that is eerily similar to the Soviet flag being raised, that famous picture, most famous pictures in history, the Soviet flag being raised over Berlin. It's like, wow, that's the symbolism. And then you have, which thank God a lot of people were calling out, the absolute traitor, pig, demon, who, worst curse in hell is he has to go and fuck his pig wife every night. Vindman saying, "You love to see it," with a picture of the burning bridge. And like, I don't know how America can tolerate a traitor and a spiritual. Never mind. I'm gonna Fed post.
Yeah.
But he is the worst, lowest form of traitor. He has a clear, motivated ethnic hatred of Russia for reasons that will get us in YouTube.
It's ancestral.
Yeah. But no, the fact that you have people that are so incompetent, that are so demonic at the highest levels of government, essentially viewing this as a sassy drop the mic
As a
cheerleader.
mitzvah.
And speaking of sassy, yeah, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
It's a mitzvah for them.
It's a mitzvah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And speaking of sassy drop the mic moments, 300,000 likes were out for what's her first name? The party slut.
Oh yeah, such a good name. Yeah.
Yeah, they asked her, what is an off ramp for Putin? She's like, if you get all the Russians out of Ukraine, that's the off ramp. But she just walks off, girl boss, like all the Finns with pronouns in their bio, all like saying she's my prime minister. Is it prime minister or president? Prime minister, right?
I think so. Who
Regional
cares?
manager.
Yeah.
I mean, she's a vassal.
She's who cares?
She's a girl boss vassal.
She's
Like,
a vassal in more ways than one. But like, imagine this is the level of discourse now. This is what the GAE has done to continental Europe. Like, the girl boss, drop the mic, the Vindman, like, in upteenth diaspora, barely masking his ancestral hatred of Russia through this petty bullshit. It's just, I can't. If I go on, save me, guys. If I go on, then I'll get banned, and I don't want that to happen. So I'll stop. But you understand the point is that.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's
symbolic, like Constantine, like you were saying, the symbolic victory of it outweighs the material victory of the fact that this is going to really hamper the endless amount of supplies flooding into the regions with the whether it be for the militias or the Rescavati or the actual, Russian military proper. But yeah, like it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw an interesting tweet by Francis Fukuyama where he said this is, it was eerily similar
Don't get me
to
started.
to
We'll talk about
what's
that.
his name, Polodny, who said, this is just the beginning. He said today's there will be an even more significant collapse coming very soon. So,
Oh yeah.
yeah. So
that means the Russian Imperium is going to last for 1,000 years now if he says it. So
yeah. I mean, I think the point of these attacks and the point of these statements and right down to, I think, even the gleeful responses, whether it's Vindman or Girl Boss Finland, the main point is to demoralize the Russian public, right? Putin's had a 5% drop in popularity, going from 83 to 78. And I'm going to presume that 5% is the 5% that, like, please nuke this piece of shit country.
Please just do it right now.
Just
Millions must die.
harden your heart and nuke them. So,
well, you had a good point, though, about people leaving conscription. You said that, if anything, it's actually hindering the objective of a regime change in Russia for the West, because all the people that left are the libs that hate Putin anyways. So
right.
Yeah.
Or they're fair weather patriots, So, I mean, obviously the attack is there to completely demoralize the Russian public, because America, right from the beginning, seeded the narrative that Russia was interested in capturing all of Ukraine, which obviously is not true, and that Kiev was going to need 2 in 96 hours. That was on the night of the invasion. That's literally what CNN said, and they had a Pentagon official quoted as saying that. Now, the whole point of this is it creates an off-ramp for the U.S. If the U.S., for whatever reason, has to shift directions, they can always say, well, this could end up as a frozen conflict, and it would just be the way the last 8 years have been, without a Minsk agreement. And you know what? Russia thought it could take Kiev, and they didn't. We know now that there was a deal that was nearly complete. Not everything was agreed upon by late March, wherein Putin was not going to take even Donbass, even Lugansk and Donetsk. He was simply asking that they are protected, that the rights are protected. Just remember that in 2016, we were talking about
Yeah, that was
Bakhmut.
mere days before Boris Johnson flew out to Ukraine.
Right. And remember that, back in 2016, Putin was asked, is Bakhmut a Russian city? He says, no, of course it's a Ukrainian city. I think I've been saying this for quite some time. Everybody is projecting stuff on Putin that is not true. It's just not there. Putin never had any intention to, like, I'll put it to you this way. This special military exercise was forced to do things it was not designed to do. Now, in spite of itself, in spite of its planning, it managed several successes, which now it has, I guess, begrudgingly for Putin, the obligation to stay in a war for a much longer period of time.
Oh yeah.
And this relates with China, which we'll eventually get to. So, the deal. This is after all the torture and murder videos that came out of Russian POWs, right? He was basically saying,
"Oh, those
look,
don't exist, though, Goran. Those don't exist. Apparently, that's not real. As of this real, it's a meme."
I mean, I've been watching the Ukrainians do this like since 2014. There's nothing like I've literally seen them hang a pregnant woman in a forest. no one is going to convince me. With the national anthem playing in the background, they're psychotic. They've always been
I mean,
psychotic.
anyone who knows anything
So
about the Volyn massacre should know this is really par for the course for what happens when
yeah,
Ukraine has the slightest bit of instability.
yeah. So I would say so. Um, this is why Strelkov basically criticized Russia because, like, now he's projecting here what Russia is going to do in Donbass. So he thought the northern front on the border between Kharkov and Lugansk that was going to switch down, and then the border between Zaporozhye and southern Donbass was going to push up, and it was going to encircle something like 200,000 APU. And he says, how are you going to do this? You don't have enough men to do this. Right? That was his main argument. And he was right about that. Whatever failures Starkov had back in 2014, he was completely right about this. Right. So um, you could, and as I've always said, the Ukrainians always looked at what Russia did as a bluff. They knew there was never enough men to take over the country. And it was the Americans basically vis-a-vis the British who convinced Zelensky basically to stay the course because I think he was truly afraid as events started to spiral. In the initial shock and success of the Russian army, he saw this as kind of like, well, they're letting us join the EU. We get all the land except Crimea, which we have to recognize as Russian clay. We just don't join NATO, and that's it. It's not bad because our chances are probably not that good. However, the Ukrainians have been mobilizing since February 25th. They have always been prepared, or elements within this command structure have always been prepared for a much, much bigger war, for a much, much bigger army,
Oh yeah.
right? And whether Zelensky was just leading them on and Boris Johnson flying in that first week of April was merely a photo op, and you're supposed to believe that he convinced Zelensky not to sign the documents for peace. The fact of the matter is, that is what was happening in the background. I tend to think that Zelensky is not that shrewd. I think
No, God, no.
I mean, he's obviously like a puppet. That's why he's an actor. He acts the part of a president. Uh, so I will say that the main purpose of these attacks, right? Like there is a critical moment, right? Like by Russia remaining quiet, what they are doing is playing a bit of a dangerous game. That act themselves could undermine confidence in Putin and in the war effort, right?
Article saying Putin's weak. He's weak in position. There's a guy in the Kremlin that hates him now that wants to go after him. Like it's the West.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
I mean, a
obviously
lot of
Western media
this,
bullshit, but like
right. A lot of this is just seeded, right?
yeah.
The corollary to that could be by his silence, Putin is preparing them for a war that will be like World War II, because the stakes are as high as they were in World War II, and that it will be a hybrid war, but it will be no less serious of a war. Um, as I said, I was very upset and emotional because, of course, they lost Liman last week, and they lost it just after Putin's speech and the signing of the four territories. And this is why I was telling Constantine, if they don't do something by October 7th, he's going to start losing support. And we're seeing evidence of that.
I just do want to bring up something tangential related to the losing support question. It's more just a funny note I want to make that, of course, the Western media will salivate over a 5% drop in popularity, and they think that comes from some sort of liberal opposition and not people who are critical of Putin for not taking the war seriously enough. The term I
Yeah.
saw going around the Russian spheres on Telegram was they're now calling it the soft military operation. So if that gives you any indication on which direction the opposition is coming from, and I believe I said this about what 3 weeks ago, that maybe it's a good thing. Zhirinovsky didn't make it this long to see what happened.
Zhirinovsky would have assassinated Putin
Oh,
and gone whole
personally,
hog.
Yeah, man. RIP to an absolute legend. Do you think that perhaps there's signs that Putin realizes the gravity of it, and that the fact that he appointed the general of the overall operation, what's his name, Sergei Sergei Surovakin, yes, in Bakhmut. So I think that's probably a sign. I mean, I'm shocked that they conducted this without a head general at the helm. That's like,
yes, this is the first time. This is the first time that the entire command is under one general, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think there has been a level of incompetence, right? I love what Russians with Attitude said. Russia showed up at a gunfight with a nuclear bomb. You're going to lose the fight. Like, what are you going to do? Swing a nuclear bomb? So anyhow, I mean, I think Russia wants this war to be as boring and drawn out as possible.
Yeah.
It cannot be overstated that they are happy with the number of Ukrainian losses. If you talk about Ukrainian losses from August 28th to October 7th or 6th, right? So we're talking about 5-6 weeks, roughly speaking.
They say 20,000 men, if I recall, that have been killed alone. Yeah.
It could be anywhere from 10 to 20,000 killed in action, not wounded, killed in action.
Yeah,
and you're looking wounded. About twice that number that are wounded.
Yeah, so, and probably a good fraction of them who could probably never recover in time to enter the battlefield in, say, a month's time out of those wounded. So,
right.
Yeah.
So, but the problem, of course, is you just signed these people into the country. Of course, they want the legitimization, right? They want the legitimization because Russian command, Russian elites, and it was outlined in Putin's speech that they want to see their proper place within the world, which to me means part and parcel of diplomacy. Which they've been very successful on, right? Because you take a look at all the countries that are still on board with them, and that doesn't look like Russia's losing. India, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, more or less.
The entirety
Turkey's
of OPEC
complicated.
at this point.
The entirety of OPEC. None of these countries are what you would consider dear friends of Russia. None of these countries are vassals to Russia. Some of them are poorer than Russia. Others are exceptionally richer than Russia. But no matter,
some of them hated them, like Iran, like because Russia funded Saddam with the Americans in the 80s. Yeah.
So
and you know, the Ayatollah yeeted a bunch of a few thousand communists, but that's, you know.
I need to go back further. Imperial Russia had holds in northern Persia, and they fought several wars with Persia, so it's a bit of a centuries-long feud if you want to put it in mild terms.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So I would say if you look at, another color revolution attempt in Iran, these countries, their leadership often under a lot of stress and threats, because you're going to see a color revolution attempt on Saudi Arabia as well. They're not moving away from Russia. They don't see a defeat.
Do you think, though, like that'd be insane, though, because up until now, Saudi Arabia is like the second greatest ally to America in the Middle East. Like,
Oh,
that's it. That's a fucking insanity. Like, I can't. Oh my
it
God.
would be like a very delicate operation, right? Because
Yeah.
America needs Saudi Arabia, particularly to
100%.
float its dollar, right? It needs
Yeah.
that.
Now, there's been
Even though
theories
Saudi
for
Arabia
years.
is selling oil and sometimes selling it in yuan, which is hemorrhaging the dollar, but the dollar, of course, is strengthened after the pipelines that it destroyed. So it would have to be a very uh, delicate operation. Individuals, I'm sure America has individuals that are paid very handsomely, and I would bet in the next 6 months a color revolution attempt on Saudi Arabia. Because Saudi Arabia didn't budge, right? All of this stuff is meant to impress the so-called allies of Russia that they are on the losing side, and they're not budging,
Now, just on
right?
the Saudi Arabia note, it's interesting that you bring up the possibility of a color revolution there because I've discussed this previously, but there's been speculation for years that the CIA and State Department, Pentagon, all the normal attack dogs of the American empire, have several contingency plans on how to deal with a hostile takeover of Saudi Arabia. Which I wouldn't even say we've gotten to that point yet. We're just in an unfavorable situation when it comes to
Yeah,
the perspective of the American
Yeah.
empire. But I mean, in terms of color revolution, I get what you're getting at, but I almost certainly believe that there is going to be a palace coup in the works, if it isn't already. That
that's what I
is
mean
going
by
to,
color
yeah,
revolution. Sorry,
um,
it would be what MBS did. It would be Saudi
yes,
Arabian style.
but yeah, there. I have no doubt that there is a palace coup in the works. I mean, we even saw hints of that. I believe it was in what 2019, 2020 when there were those drones that swarmed MBS's residence, and they had to actually deploy military forces to take them down. So there have been people from all over the world who have been dissatisfied with Mohammed bin Salman's position of prominence in Saudi Arabia. And keep in mind, he technically isn't even on the throne yet. His it's either his father or his uncle that is still in charge, and he's the first one of the new generation that is set to inherit the throne whenever the current king passes, and he's late 80s, I believe, and that's just I think it's King Solomon at this point. I doubt, yeah, that really narrows it down. I know,
Yeah,
but yeah, so they do fear that, especially considering the fact within the next few years he will be officially in charge of Saudi Arabia, and I do think that could be a make or break moment when it comes to that because love him or hate him, Mohammed bin Salman certainly is anticipating this. Certainly is anticipating something like this happening, and I
you
think
don't
if
think he's anticipating it?
no, I do think he's anticipating it.
Oh, okay,
Um,
yeah.
but
But then how could they attempt a palace coup in Saudi Arabia? Like, oh well, I shouldn't say that. Like, what will be
He
the
probably
obvious
has like
logical?
he
Yeah.
probably has 2 dozen brothers, right?
oh
Half
yeah, at
brothers.
Oh, I
least
see.
uh,
And a lot of them probably were educated in America anyways, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
yeah,
there you
half
go.
of them have let's just say unsavory blackmail from their trips to the United States. I'm sure you all know the stories about the Saudi princes and what they get up to when they go outside of the country. But
Yeah, so a lot of it's very scatological, if I recall,
oh
with
yes,
certain
very
proselytes.
very much
Yeah,
indeed. Even though that's more of an Emirati thing, it still happens in Saudi Arabia. But
yeah.
with that being said, love him or hate him, I think if there's anyone with the skill to outmaneuver a palace coup, it would be MBS.
Yeah,
What
yeah. He's ruthless. He did everything correctly when he took over. He obviously has the support. Um, I don't know if it's going to work. I don't think so. Um, I think it will fail.
But what would the other OPEC nations do in that case if they logically see that America is essentially conducting a color revolution in Saudi Arabia? They're like, I guess it doesn't matter if Saudi Arabia's at the helm, but like, what would the other OPEC countries do? Like, I guess, yeah.
Theoretically, most of them would probably fold.
Oh fuck! Oh my god!
I would guess Bahrain would fold. Oman would fold. Qatar, I don't know. Qatar has an
I think Qatar actually suspended its membership all the way back in like what 2018, 2019. So they
oh,
aren't
you're
even a
right.
seat
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
table. I mean, like Iran and Venezuela at that point would probably be the only ones who wouldn't budge.
Right, right. If it should happen, but I think they see this as a kind of a united movement, and they see the benefits of America losing hegemony just too good to pass up.
Well, and
And
it seems like for the first time, they're actually acting as a coherent cartel. Now, of course, you can point to their entire history, but it's more
Yeah.
or less, although they have pushed back against the American Empire some, it was a block between the American Empire in order to put pressure on the Soviet economy, which I'm not going to say was based on oil, but had a very strong energy industry, to put it that way. And
mm,
with that being said, I do think they realize the moment of the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, that American empire that could be anywhere in the world and take out Saddam within however long it took for the Operation Desert Storm to take place, or just some of the, or for example, the campaigns in Yugoslavia during
Enduring
the 90s.
freedom.
Yeah, yeah, yes,
yeah,
but point being is they realize that
What a
that
name.
that American hard power is gone, while the American soft power is still very strong and the economic power is still very strong. It is waning. So I
yeah,
think they see the
Hmm.
perfect opportunity that they realize if they band together, they can be a block in this, and that they can knock the dominant power in the world down a few pegs, which certainly benefits them.
But the
yeah.
possibility of war in the Middle East again is almost next to zero. Where I don't know, like what is the position of the Knesset towards the Saudis currently? Are they like, this can't be good between the two? I mean,
They're
uh,
frenemies.
they're frenemies. Yeah, they've
They're
always been
frenemies.
frenemies. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but the question of
Uh,
the Iranian starting to gradually normalize relations with Saudi Arabia puts a whole new
yeah,
element
yeah,
into it. So
Yeah.
things are
yeah.
at
Good point.
so much of a balance where it's one of the situations. I know I like to make the example right now. No, but nobody wants to take the first shot in this, nor is
Yeah.
there any real impetus to do so, because I have some news about it, but we'll get into Syria. Syria is mostly cleaned up. Yemen has become an afterthought, and that's, again, not to downplay some of the very harrowing things that have happened there. You have tentative relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran being restored. You have the deals between Israel and the Gulf states. You have Egypt, which has been mostly kept at bay, so nobody really has the motivation or the wherewithal to really do anything at this point. And I think it would take pr-
Yeah.
probably a much more, who knows, maybe Netanyahu will rally around the campaign of the Iranians are on the brink of destroying our precious little Jewish state in the Middle East, but it
Yeah,
could,
they'll never let the Saudis go with Iran. Like
yeah,
that's like their last thing they want. Yeah.
no, they,
Well, I mean, the thing that the Saudis are waiting on right now is the same thing that the Russians are waiting on, and that is the collapse of Europe, right? The number one problem that America has with now the greater centralized control over Europe is it
Hmm.
has a much poorer Europe. So what is it that they're going to like? How much can they contribute to NATO, right? If both past presidencies wanted NATO countries to contribute larger funds into NATO. How are they going to do it with all these countries becoming poorer, right? And today there were protests in Austria,
Yeah.
Belgium,
Academic
Germany,
Agent was talking about it. Yeah.
France, Czech Republic, um, and when the colder
I
weather
saw
comes,
Romania, and pretty much every country worth salt had at least some protest
yeah,
movement
you're right,
going on over
Romania
the
as
past
well.
week.
Yes, and so
Maybe good for
um,
Alex Kashuda was in there.
right, so so they're waiting on that, and this is a real problem. So America didn't want Europe to be able to have a point of argument for the lifting of the sanctions, so you blow up both pipelines. Now the Russians are trolling them and saying, actually, Nord Stream 2 isn't really damaged very badly at all. We can fix it. Do you want to fix it? Of course, they're all going to say no. and then blame Russia for destroying it. So as AA put it, we will blow up your pipelines and you'll be happy. So that's a big problem for the U.S. Now it's buoyed up the American dollar, but it has destroyed the euro. It has destroyed the pound. The pound is the lowest it's ever been in history. Something that it's on parity with the U.S. dollar, which it's never been before. So all of these countries will have less buying power, but they'll have less money altogether. And the way they want to go about this is Europe is going to print more euros for energy that doesn't exist, right? Here's extra cash. Inflation will go up next year, and you can buy that gas for energy that we don't have. So this is sort of the larger, grander picture of what's happening. And I would imagine that when Fukuyama says wait for even bigger collapses, it means that America has other terrorist attacks in mind, right? America. Okay, so early on, I mentioned what the off-ramp was for America, right? That the win is Russia doesn't get all of Ukraine because they've already successfully ceded that argument for the West. That argument, earlier on today, I thought that argument could still be used. Now I'm wondering. Now I think the argument for a win is for there to be some kind of a regime change. It doesn't mean they can't fall back on the other one. That's safe now. That argument, this is how we got the W instead of the L, is still there, right? They can pull that up whenever they want to. They know now that Russia, even if it manages to stabilize its borders in Ukraine, it does not have intentions of taking over the entire country, despite what so many pro-Russia accounts
people.
Yeah, what NAFO people say, and also people that are very pro-Russia say, right? People are placing people are projecting things that aren't there, right? Like Putin isn't the guy you think he is what I'm saying. He thinks a political economic victory will be the lasting victory overall. He thinks that's the best victory that can be had from this situation. And Europe has not been tested yet, right? Europe, what has happened is unprecedented for at least 80 years. And the test will come. It has just started. So we'll see where it goes.
We'll see. I think it's a real possibility that European countries will slip into third world status in our lifetime.
I'm
terrifying.
glad you brought that up. I have a swell of information on Europe I'm going to get into in a couple minutes here. Go ahead and finish. I just have a couple of items to round out Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm curious about the actual economic news, but also Ukraine. I also forgot to mention that apparently the Iranian drones have hit a major communications hub and an actual command base in Odessa.
Yeah, the first one. They've pulled so many troops and air defense systems from the west and the center of Ukraine into the east to deal with the Russian forces there, that they slipped. I mean, these things make a buzzing sound. They're not fast at all. I don't know if you've seen the videos.
Oh yeah, where they're trying to shoot him they're trying to pigeon shoot him. Yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, you need to reincarnate Tom Knapp and send him there with his Benelli shotgun. And so,
what the Russians should do is they should have a pre-recording of somebody with that evil laugh just before it.
Or the Flight of the Valkyries, maybe. And the fucking Ukraine, or whatever the equivalent.
Yeah, suka blyat, pizdets.
Another ammo dump just goes up. Yeah. No, I was gonna say I was talking to Soso recently. So this is a Content Minded exclusive right here. episode will be out in a few weeks. Where
Nice.
I asked him about Russia, and of course I'm gonna have to probably paywall because I'm like super annoyed about YouTube, but I don't know how the Duran gets away with it. I asked him about Russia, and he said, "Here's the thing: a lot of, and which I guess we're going to talk about when we talk about the dissident right portion. But before that, he said the reality is that when you talk about people making these cope takes of like the GAE is forever, it's here to stay, it's super like Fukuyama's unironically right. We're done. I'll sign my kid up to the gender clinic. You know, we're gonna win." I think like the reality on the ground is that this war will last at least 2 to 3 to 4 years. It won't be a quick war, and that the way that the Russians operate, you have to realize that that's their history. Is that what is the motto of Russian history? First, it was bad, but then it got worse. But then, for some reason, maybe from divine providence, they always managed to survive somehow. And I think that a lot of people in the West that are looking for and this is what he said, a lot of people in the West looking for hot takes on all sides, they neglect the actual conduction of this war and the way that the Russians have strategically planned things out. And the Russians, they don't want to do this like blitzkrieg and take all of it over. They don't want this. They want a war.
They would never, and Constantine and I, from the beginning, said, if 70 years of communism were not able to convert some of these people, it will never happen.
No.
Right?
No.
And I always said, does Russia even have the money if it went like systematically destroying all of Ukraine to rebuild it once they took it? I think they
with the help
know
of the Chinese.
Yeah, that's a good point, but
no, it's
then
not
they become beholden as well. So I mean, I would. I've always been to some extent skeptical of that notion. What Russia is ultimately seeking in Ukraine is that Ukraine goes through a civil war with itself and resolves this.
Yeah.
And if it has to do that by killing as many Ukrainians until that break happens, that break may not happen. But until that break happens, I think they're going to continue prosecuting this war the way they are. Now, all bets are off by, let's say, the second week of December, because that's when you're going to start seeing the mobilization forces come in.
Yeah, near Christmas is always like a big thing in everywhere. I mean, the Battle of the Bulge was similar.
Right.
Like, it's funny because Soso even said that. Like, he said that, like, exactly what you said. The Russians, their off ramp is either what is 100% necessity is they have to take Odessa because that will landlock Ukraine. That will make Western arms shipments incredibly difficult. Number two would be, ideally, the fantasy is that they would go after Kiev and they'd force Zelensky to sign a deal or whatever, or they'll be at the footsteps of Kiev, but that's probably maybe in a few years' time. That's probably not going to happen. So when it comes to, but then he said, Soso said that when it comes to the Ukrainians forcing a regime change upon themselves, it's very clear that they don't care about throwing men into the meat grinder. It's very clear that they will tolerate huge casualty rates, that unless Russia is like so craven and genocidal enough to like actually do the millions must die plan, which they don't actually, then that in itself would be an impossibility. The only realistic thing is that when it comes to the death of men, it's not just about death. It's about what that does to a society when a huge number of especially young men die. When it comes to the economic impact of that, when it comes to greater Europe being turned into a third world country because they have no choice, because as we know, they've consigned their fate to America, or rather, I should say, the Washington machine. And so I think that this sort of romantic, like wholesome Chungus nationalism that's compelling them to like move all of their men and not concede an inch, and how dare we go back, and like even though it takes thousands of men, we'll still hold on to even like the smallest piece of cow patty. That I think, I know Alexander McCoy, he's like, well, that's not realistic because eventually, like, you know, Ukraine doesn't have that much men compared to what people think. But that being said, it's like the fact that they've managed to tolerate this number of casualties shows
Mhm.
that option of Ukraine going to war with itself, that might not happen this year or next year or the year after, maybe the year after. Maybe by the time, say if these casualties continue on a 3-to-1 basis where Russia is losing relatively few
Well, it's
troops.
even by Ukraine. They're saying the southern offensive is at least 5-to-1 or 6-to-1.
God, yeah.
Well, I think
But say
a
it's
nice tangent for this
consistent.
is that the Rada has actually looked into and voted to approve the investigation of moving to conscript women into the Ukrainian
Yeah.
armed forces.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my God.
that is the
Oh.
level of scraping of barrel that we're at.
Yeah.
I mentioned this probably about a year ago when they considered women adding women to the selective service, that this is either some virtue signal or they are preparing for something where they're going to scrape the bottom of the barrel so hard that they're going to need to pull women into the armed forces. And this should be common
Yeah.
sense to everyone, especially watching this or listening to this program. But the minute you need women to take up arms, that's you are beyond lost at that point. Your
Yeah.
cause is
Yeah.
so far ground into dust that there is just no hope.
You might as well send men and old men and young children into the battle.
Yeah.
In
yeah.
which case you already
Literal.
The way a civil war can and might likely happen is, I would say up until this point, it would have been the high casualty rates that offered that prospect. But actually, more likely is that Europe simply cannot afford to pay for Ukraine.
Yeah.
And America will find itself more
The
alone.
sole provider, the brother's keeper of Ukraine.
Right. Like, we're seeing unity because Ukraine is receiving something like $8 to $10 billion to pay for everything there.
Yeah.
Right. And like I say, Europe is not tested yet. And the new arrangement between Europe and America has not been tested yet.
Do you think
So-
that the healthcare is also another factor? The fact that they're being flown, like Ukrainian troops are being flown to England and Germany and Belgium, that these systems are, like, especially England, the NHS is already to the brink, right? Like here in Canada, like,
Right.
that could potentially be a poison pill as well. That you would have such a high number of Ukrainian casualties going off to be medevaced into England and into Germany and France. That, I mean, that's probably maybe
For
that's
once,
not-
the
I mean,
ICUs might
we
actually
have-
be full.
You're right. I mean, the Prime Minister of Belgium, home of the EU, has said Europe is going to be deindustrialized, and that means they will become ever more dependent on the U.S. But the U.S. is in itself fighting to keep the dollar going.
Yeah.
And besides intimidation, it does not have anything to offer. It cannot offer Saudi Arabia anything. It cannot offer China anything.
Mm.
It can threaten, but it cannot offer anything. And I think this is why they're like the bets are still on Russia's side in this war. Like I say, it's critical for Putin because you've signed these new territories into your country. Everybody is speculating, including some of the politicians, that now that they're a part of Russian territory, they will be defended in a way that they weren't before. Well, there's not that much evidence of that. And, one of the reasons why I got banned from a different chat is, I said something like, I'll believe it when I see it. 6 chat rooms in 2 weeks. Anyhow,
Wait, you got banned for Vatnik posting, or did you got banned for Doom posting?
Doom posting.
Against Russia or against the West?
No, against Russia, like against the way the war is being conducted.
They
know.
I see.
They know like where my heart lies, but they don't like the Doom posting. And I mean, maybe I'll read to you what Slavyan Guard said.
You were scolded very, very harshly. You said that was very funny.
Do you want me to read it?
If you insist, I won't stop you.
It's just too hilarious.
But
I mean,
before that, though, a
listen,
little tidbit I have.
he's right. He is right. Like, I will say that he is right. I don't know what it is. I can't help it in the moment, even when I say I won't do it again. But I'll read it to you. This is when I said about Putin and has given Ukraine more morale than Zelensky. So he says, I've actually put up with you for quite a while. I don't want to be censorious, but you are constantly dooming, constantly upvoting other doomers, and constantly making snide comments. Perhaps you'll be happier somewhere else. No, it's not just because of this one comment.
Oh, gee. Oh, man.
But he is right. I mean, even Wagner has told people, stop dooming. You're affecting the troops. Don't do this. So it is important. Prestige is a part of it, but I think Putin has made up his mind to fight the war in a certain way. Again, I say until sometime in December when the 300K come in. What happens then, I don't know. But that is how he's gone about it. Like, if he wanted it, he could have destroyed. There are 5 bridges in the area that surrounded Izium.
Yeah.
He could have taken all of them out, and it would have delayed the Ukrainian advance for a long time. They would have had to put pontoon bridges. Their air force could have gone in. Long-range artillery, MLRS, could have been used to constantly shell them. Ukrainians have lost several, especially in the south, in Kherson and the Uglitz River, lots and lots of material and men.
The Ingulets.
Ingulets, yeah. So, but that didn't happen.
Well,
right?
I know the column in Kherson through that asphalt road was largely unmolested, even by Russian Air Force. And that could be because of the weather, but even by Russian artillery, like, maybe, I don't know, maybe my Vatnik hope is that, like, maybe Putin has like 4D, 5D, 6D chess, that he's luring them into a meat grinder, he's luring them into a feint, and that by the time the troops get in there, it's going to be like curtain call. For, I don't know, no, maybe not. That's too far.
I mean, like I say, his major thing that he has to watch out for is Ukraine begins to encircle important towns and cities that Russia has taken. More important than Liman, more important than Izium. And there are towns and cities that fit that description. Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Kherson City, Novokakhovka, Energedar, Melitopol. Mariupol is a stretch, but he cannot afford that.
No,
I don't think so. Those, like, it's not about, well, at least it didn't take it. No, the point is, look what Donetsk City has to suffer on a daily basis, right? Even this week, there were people who were fleeing in the Kryvyi Rog region to get into Russia. And of course, the Ukrainians just shelled these civilians. The BBC even showed like, they're walking and it shows like civilian cars. There's only one military truck. It is a truck. It doesn't have guns on it. I'm sure he was guiding them out of that area, right? Because Ukrainians don't look at them as people. They just look at, these are subhumans occupying our land. And
I know the Sun
another
UK,
30 were killed around Liman.
About it, like, just bragging, gloating that the Ukrainians bombed this area. Like, on the Sun, Sun UK, they're like the worst offender for this.
Yeah. And we've seen this cycle happen over and over again. That's having a grading effect. However, if Kherson is in the same position that Donetsk is in, right, there's big trouble. Now, Russia has committed very well into protecting the south. They've had a massive withdrawal in the eastern part, the northeastern part of Kherson, right? But there, like Constantine pointed out, this strike on the bridge is an attempt to stop military supplies from flowing in. Now, Crimea is not the only route that military supplies come into the country. And if I may say one more thing about that bridge, notice that there was a very small train with only like something like 25 cars that blew up, and it was exactly at the place where the truck blew up. That, to me, it could be a fluke, but if it's not a fluke, that means they knew when that train would be there and what would be the maximal cause where both car traffic and train traffic would be affected.
Major intelligence leak, yeah. Like,
right,
unless they're doing a scouting with American intelligence where they're observing, but like, yeah, that's.
I honestly think these are just people scouting.
Yeah.
I don't even, like a guy in one of my Orthodox chats said, how do we know it's even that deep? He's got a point, right?
You literally just need to send a guy every single day to observe the traffic.
That's right.
That's it. Yeah.
Literally, thieves work the same way when they stake out a neighborhood and start stealing from all the houses, right? It's not like super complicated, right?
If Haitians on the east of Toronto can figure that out, then I'm sure.
Whoa, spicy.
Whoa.
So yeah. So I would say that is how the bridge fits into the. Now the word is in the area of where Liman used to be, just behind the front lines of Liman, in the Liman direction. I mean, there's reports of like 20 to 40,000 Ukrainians that are ready to storm. I don't know if it's going to hold. I mean, I would say be prepared for Russia to lose more territory, particularly in the north, because I think they've made up their mind that the north is more expendable than the south, for obvious reasons. You pointed out the potential of one day taking Odessa to cut Ukraine off completely from the Black Sea. The other is, well, I mean, that is, even if they don't take Odessa, the south, just for sea transport and all other kinds of strategic reasons, is more valuable than the north, because the north is covered. Russia is right next door. So, they can, and this is the other problem, right? Like, how much territory are you going to cede before you have to reinvade again, right? Putin has tried to conduct this war that does not alarm the Russian public. And the Russian public has been, up until now, has almost like forgotten about this war. They're not that affected. Economically, things are fairly good, given that Russia is sanctioned by a magnitude or two worse than North Korea.
The dollar, I believe, the ruble is at the level of 2021, if I recall. They recently
it's at
the inflation rate.
It's actually at a level of 2015. It's much better than that. So I would say the strategy going forward for the US is demoralize the public. Notice how with them, they believe that it doesn't matter who replaces Putin. As long as Putin is replaced, this buys the West time.
It's like, we got Hitler. It's like that's
an off-ramp,
thinking.
right?
Yeah.
That's an off-ramp. Of course, he could be replaced by somebody who's more aggressive, right? But they believe that this will be a shock to the Russians because of the length of time that Putin has been in office. And that's what they're betting on. So they don't care who replaces him. It's also an off-ramp. If Ukraine is never going to be, it's very likely Ukraine is never going to take back Crimea.
No.
It's never going to get back to Donbass. It may probably never get the south either. And you need an off-ramp. And if the off-ramp is a guy that does more saber rattling than Putin, but at the same time, Putin is gone, then you have your off-ramp, right? The regime changes the other off-ramp because the previous off-ramp, well, at least it didn't take all of Ukraine, is insufficient now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I mean, like, the reality of it is that I think if Russia mobilizes and they do manage to retake Krasny Lyman, Lyman, not Krasny Lyman, that's the way they call it. If they do manage to take Lyman, if they do manage to make major front near Odessa, and if those troops are sufficient enough to plug the gaps, given the lower rates of casualties that the Russians have suffered than the Ukrainians, then I mean, potentially Putin could be in a stronger position come next year. The new year. But you never know. I mean, another tidbit I wanted before we leave off this topic is, for months now I've been hearing that apparently the Chechens are dissatisfied and that there's actually Chechens who joined the Ukrainians.
Well, there's always been Chechens who've joined the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
It goes back over a decade.
Exactly.
Longer.
Do you know the leader, apparently, of the Cossacks that are fighting with the Ukrainians is the same imam that organized the Beslan attack? So Ukrainians, they're very fine with child murderers, obviously, as long as just to say, like, the whole like spook of like Kadyrov is dissatisfied, he's going to turn against Putin, and the Chechens are going to turn against Putin, and like that's been I know in the British media in particular, that's been like a huge talking point. But then when you look at the these divisions of Chechens that are actually fighting with the Ukrainians, like literal Beslan child murderers. But
yeah. I mean, they're genocidal, right? They are genocidal. They'll say we have to kill all of them because they'll kill us. Like, they paid your entire debt twice. They ceded hundreds of thousands of kilometers to you.
They lost God knows how many
to make you a more viable state. Like, you had the highest living standard in the Soviet Union and in the Warsaw Pact. And they were trying to genocide you. It's so preposterous. Even the civilian deaths, the vast majority of civilian deaths since February 24th have been in the Donbass area. They are not in Kiev or Vinnytsia or Lvov or Odessa. Okay, they are all in the east at a rate of 5-1.
Yeah.
So spare me. Nobody's trying to genocide Ukrainians.
Just like how all those poor Galicians whose grandparents lived in Poland were the target of Joseph Stalin in 1933. Just it's history repeating itself.
Yeah. Never forget. But that's what I mean. The Western people, they don't hear this. They don't, when they hear now, of course, in Lyman, they're doing the whole bit where the Russians bury the dead Ukrainian soldiers with their ID markers that they've given to the Ukrainians. Now that they've gone into these areas, they're saying, "Oh, there's mass graves of Ukrainians." Like, that's the way it works. But
and you know what? That story is now dead because there's just too much evidence that the Russians literally gave them proper burials.
Yeah.
They erected crosses.
They gave them
those that
markers.
they had names.
Yeah.
Yes, grave markers with the crosses have their names on them. Don't fall for it. It's the Russians did this because they're playing 4D chess.
They buried them in their NATO acquired camo gear in their full military uniform. But it's like, don't. There were civilians though. The civilians, they cosplay as soldiers. Did you know this in Ukraine? Civilians cosplay, especially kids, they cosplay as soldiers, and then the Russians kill them, and that's how they do it. It's a tragedy.
Yeah. I'll just say one more bit of news in Ukraine, and that is there have been significant gains, relatively speaking, in the direction of Bakhmut. So now Bakhmut from the south is completely cut off. So you've got Russian forces from the east and Russian forces from the south. It's estimated, nobody knows for sure, that Ukrainians have about 30,000 troops, both in Bakhmut and the immediate surrounding region. Again, we'll see what will happen. For Russia to try to take Slavyansk will be very hard because now they have no northern front. They were within 20 kilometers of downtown Slavyansk, 25, let's say, if I remember correctly. That's not there anymore. So if Bakhmut falls, the Ukrainians will just move to Slavyansk and then later to Kramatorsk. So but Bakhmut, is a bigger complex. It's 100,000 if you don't include Soledar. Soledar, I think, is another 50,000. So it's much bigger than a place like Liman, which, before the war, maybe there were 10,000 people there. Far fewer after. So that's all the news I have.
I have one last throwaway piece of news for Ukraine, which is Zelensky's comments regarding a preemptive nuclear strike on Russia.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Oh boy.
I just want to.
Dugan right again.
Oh, who would have thought?
Yeah.
Nuclear apocalyptic realism right there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
last war.
Yeah, but of course, I just want to
psychological.
talk about some of the general reaction to this, because I saw people who are far from pro-Russia and arguably even were pro-Ukraine at the beginning of the conflict, like, denounce this. And it does seem, as time goes on, months and months, one of the things that you can actually look on the optimistic side in the West is the way the Ukrainians conduct themselves, the way Zelensky in particular conducts themselves. They constantly throw away any goodwill that is built up towards them. And although there is still large contingents of populations in Western countries who do buy into the entire Ukrainian narrative, more and more of that gets chipped away every time Zelensky makes a comment, every time one of these videos from some of these banderists come out, anytime any of these absurd Ukrainian actions come out, anytime you interact with any NAFO people on Twitter, all of that, and I know it's very minuscule, but again, that's just support
Block
shedding
them on
away.
site, by the way.
Oh,
Block them on site.
Absolutely. You don't need to tell me twice, but I mean, I'll go in threads
They
sometimes.
brag about banning people. They brag about mass reporting people, just by the way.
Oh, yeah.
They're absolute ghouls, and I have no respect for the sports ball event. I mean, listen, I may have done that a few times with Russia, but them doing this but I mean, sorry, Koshevka. Sorry.
But just to follow up on that point, sometimes I'll just go on Ukrainian news threads and just updates about it, and just go through when I'm bored and just mass block these people. Like it is cathartic. I'll give you that much.
Yeah.
But yeah, you had Zelensky make those
one
comments.
less of them to worry about.
Oh yeah. But you had Zelensky make those comments, which it's strange because both sides at that point seem very pessimistic about their situations, despite what they may want to present to the world.
I just said kick Russia. I didn't say blow up. I said kick.
I mean, but yeah. Beyond that, all I can really say is I wish I could remember who said this, because I want to give them proper credit, but they said Russian forces in Kiev seem about as distant as Ukrainian forces in Sevastopol, which I think is a pretty good summary of the current state of the war.
I have one thing to add that you've reminded me.
Okay.
Now that you mention it, is the New York Times had an article where the U.S. actually distanced itself by saying, we're pretty sure the SBU tried to assassinate Alexander Dugin and killed Daria Dugina. Someone asked me, why would they say that? I said, well, besides, because it happened right around this, either the same day or, maybe less than 24 hours before or after Zelensky's request for the U.S. to nuke Russia. I said to him, well, it's kind of like the pipelines that they blew up, right? It's kind of like a humble brag, right? They get to distance themselves from assassinating a Russian citizen in Moscow, and at the same time, you know that they helped them do it. In the same way that they say they didn't blow up the pipelines, but based on
100% they
Blinken's
did, yeah.
remarks, you know that they did. So they get to distance themselves from it and also signal that, yeah, we helped them kill her.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
no
100%.
surprise at that point, and I can expect more of those kind of comments to come out over the next few months, especially if the expected Russian turnaround does happen towards the end of the year, towards the beginning of next year. I would keep my eye out for more of those tacit comments where they admit it but also try to pass blame on it. Now, with all that being said, we do have quite a bit of news about Europe, starting mainly with Germany. We're about a week and a half out from the destruction of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. You had mentioned earlier that Russia was doing a little bit of a troll, having a little bit of fun at the West's expense, saying, well, Nord Stream 2 might be within the bounds of repair if we're just allowed to investigate, if we're just allowed to take a look on it. And I don't know how much I believe that claim. I do think it is just poking and prodding, as one does diplomatically. But just taking a look at the gravity of the situation in Germany, you're looking at the pre-reports from this and the post-reports from this. Now, of course, it's only been about a week and a half, so we don't really have too accurate numbers, but you're looking at a country that was already expecting to have a temporary halt in industry. And with these destructions of these pipelines, is now chatter coming out of Germany on both sides of the Atlantic that this country may be deindustrialized for the foreseeable future. And you have major steel manufacturers, uh, chemical product manufacturers, pretty much all of the key industry you see come out of Germany is expected to come down and go abroad. I think it was BASF, the major chemical manufacturer, is wanting to now open its plants in China in order to supplement the energy costs, and they say that it's temporary. Although there's chattering that when these sort of things happen temporarily, it is usually a sign that it's much cheaper to operate in China or wherever else than it is in Germany, and that the severing of Russian energy supplies is made has made German energy and German products completely untenable. It's made German manufacturing prices skyrocket to the roof to the point where it simply isn't worth it, even domestically, let alone being a major exporter, let alone being the economic engine of the European Union. And this is far from a unique comparison, but Blinken's comments over the past week did remind me of this because it said, perhaps there's new opportunity here now that the pipeline has been demolished and destroyed. I mean,
Tremendous
Of
opportunity.
course.
truly,
Yeah.
Blinken right now is
Stunning
making
90 IQ take.
is making Morgenthau blush. And like I said, I'm far from the first person to make that observation, but it is a continent-wide
for sure.
Morgenthau plan at this point. And
It literally is a
I would
Morgenthau
actually,
plus Galergy plan.
I would.
If not, it's a Kalergi.
It is an unholy union between the two, is the way I would put it. Frankly, I mean, the past 10 years in Europe, don't even get me started on that. But I would actually argue this is going to be worse than the Morgenthau plan because that targeted Germany in particular and wanted to break down Germany into several constituent states that were just kept barely alive by their own agriculture at most. Let's be clear, at most. But no, they want to do this to the entirety of Europe. And we've talked about this. I'll put it in more YouTube-friendly terms. The US dollar has been buoyed by stripping the copper wire from Europe's house. Let's say they imported some experts from certain ethnic groups in Romania to assist them with that. Perhaps they're the new driving strategists in foreign policy. But it is a
Instead of
complete...
junkyard America, it's junkyard Europe right now.
No, it is a complete cleaning house of Europe, and we discussed this last week. But Germany has been brought to its knees. They will not come back from this, and they'll be lucky even if they can have a self-sustaining domestic manufacturing base in the future, let alone the rest of Europe, let alone being a world power in manufacturing. And it's gotten to the point where Merkel has come out of her retirement, and you'll recall she looked pretty in pretty poor health when she went into retirement. I'm sure you remember several of the state
Yeah.
ceremonies where she was just shaking like a leaf. A lot of people expect Parkinson's. That's what I personally expected in my amateur opinion. But you had Merkel calling for negotiations with Russia and more or less saying her legacy has been completely flushed down the toilet. Now, this is no defense of Merkel. Merkel did terrible things
No.
for Germany, especially when it came to the migrant crisis. But one key thing she had right, which is an opinion that has been prevailing in Germany, or trying to prevail in Germany, I should say, for about the past 150 years, is that partnership with Russia is vital for Germany to truly be a power on the world stage, to truly have any weight to throw around. And, like I said, you can condemn her for everything else, but credit where credit is due when Merkel made these moves to integrate Russian energy into German industry, because it was the key to even keeping Germany in the albeit subdued position it is right now. But what we see currently in a post-Merkel Germany, who thought it could get worse, I guess you should never say that because there always seems to be a way it gets worse, is that all of that has been squandered, and it's the point where Germany is now begging the United States to send LNG shipments that it isn't even prepared to receive. We've discussed the logistical problems with this, going all the
There
way
aren't
back
even
to,
enough ships.
yeah, going all the
No.
way back to 2019 when Trump was first haranguing on the issue that, oh, we'll sell Europe our natural gas. Well, the Europeans don't have the ports to receive these, especially the Germans. There aren't enough ships to send in. And as we've seen with the precedent set, I know the United States is a more powerful country than, say, Iran or whatever, but judging by the many tanker wars we saw in 2018 and 2019, high seas piracy is now on the table, especially in the case of a declining U.S. military, because really anyone will tell you that the quality of not only the personnel, but the equipment just across the board has gone down in the military. So you're looking at the possibility. I doubt Russia will be brazen enough, at least in the near future, to seize U.S. cargo ships coming into Europe. I could possibly see, and it's a very, very slim possibility, China harassing American cargo ships in the Pacific, but I think that'd be pretty far off, and as I said, a slim possibility. But, I mean, just bringing back an age of piracy, sending out third parties to do these things, much like we saw, as I said, in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, where you had just these tankers being captured back and forth between the Americans and the Iranians. Now, I know they've been doing this
Yeah.
for decades, but it picked up to a whole new scale in 2018, 2019. So, I don't think we can take high seas piracy off the table when it comes to that. But getting back to the original point, Germany is now begging the United States for something that it, A, cannot, or B, even if they could, would not supply to them. And
Mhm.
I do think one thing I have realized out of all of this, the example of Germany, is right now the United States is the way United States is treating Germany is sending a very clear message to Russia. If you submit to the American empire, this is the way they will treat you, if not worse. This is the way they treat their conquered foes.
This is prison yard politics right here. And to your credit, everyone's favorite Yame Mame, Nina Byzantina actually tweeted about this, about whatever, like, however evil, and she's done monumental evil that Merkel has done. She has had consistently one of the most, I would say, pragmatic takes on the Russian situation. And, and I mean, that'd be kind of interesting, though. Can you imagine the combined, like, autist chud rage of a Russo-Germanic alliance? That'd be like the world could get conquered by them. You never know. And
The fear of the Anglo-American bloc for the past 150 years. And as I was telling GSP, I think it was yesterday, that we're seeing the dreams of the British Empire of actively going in and breaking up a Russian-German alliance, coming into fruition in real time, that uh, that Lord Salisbury couldn't have designed it better himself.
Yeah, I mean, that was the ultimate threat, because even before the war started, uh, I predicted that if the world is moving towards a multipolar world, America will choose a bipolar world instead, because the combination of cheap energy to Germany uh, keeps its industrial capacity intact
And that's
for
on top of Germany, that
manufacturing.
is now the economic engine of all of Europe.
Right. And so that combination for America is too dangerous. It knows that countries gradually are de-dollarizing. It knows that its economy is mostly financialized. Um, and it cannot accept that, right? So um, it is decided that even though destroying Germany will mean and also destroying Europe, then that is a better scenario than the alternative.
Yeah, but they're Europors, so who cares, right? As long as America,
Yeah.
number one.
You did this to yourself, Europors. We had nothing to do with it.
You know, that comment you said last week really struck me, actually, that the average like German bureaucrat has has just as much power, which is to say none at all, over the affairs of the American government as the average dissident right winger posting on Twitter and
Yeah.
Telegram has over the American government currently. So
Yeah.
that's common, really. Like, I know, like, I mean, I don't want to offend all of my American friends, because of course you have to separate between what is that original spirit of the American people and what is the sort of metastatic cancer that is the American government
Oh, don't
and the
worry.
American
We've
ruling
we've
class.
hammered that
Yeah,
nail in the
right.
wherever, and we have. Let's just say we've burned any bridges of the people who would be offended by those comments. So speak freely, please.
Oh, we burned tons of bridges.
Oh man.
More
Like
than the Ukrainians.
I think that the thing is that a lot of people on the dissident right, they sort of have to play coy. There's one faction, and let's face it, they're largely Americans that
Oh
have,
yeah.
yeah, that they're like, we can't
Overwhelming.
over that they sort of like have to play coy and be like, well, it'd be nice if Russia wins because of Globo Homo supporting Ukraine, but it's like we can't exactly counter signal it because, it's like basically we'll get accused of the right wing third worldist, third position, anti-Americanism. And, so that's like a big force of like American right wingers online, is that they can't, they'll make that wager when push comes to shove, is like, well, as long as America's on top. I mean, we know that
Yeah,
global
exactly.
liberalism wants to rot the American people, like literally actually transmogrify the American people from the inside. And we know that there's no benefit to imperial expansion of America the way that there was for British citizens when they conquered new territory, the way there was for Romans, the way that there was for Greeks, for Chinese. Well, I mean, the Chinese conquering their neighbors, but whatever. Like, the point being is that the fruits of imperial engagement of the GAE, has not come home
Well, I
whatsoever.
know I'm probably going to dig
It's
myself into a hole with this one, but I'll say at
yeah,
least post-Civil War America, the entire system,
yeah,
especially around imperial expansion, has been prepping for your replacements to come in. Like, whether that be from the original Anglo-Celtic stock, to the German stock, to the Irish stock, to the Southern and Eastern European stock, to the Hispanic stock, to the Asian stock. Again, it's just a chain of every few generations, wherever the empire expands or wherever the empire now has influence. And like I said, I'd put it post Civil War, post 1865 is probably a good gauge for that. That, yeah, like when you move to integrate further with India or China or X, Y, or Z country, you're preparing for those people not only to receive your tax money going overseas, but large swaths of their population coming over to supplant you. And that's the way,
yeah,
unfortunately, the American system has been since at least 1865, and arguably even before that, where it has been a system just built on cycling through new populations. And I think that's probably one of the biggest flaws of it and one of the biggest things that had gone wrong there. Which, again, even going back to the days of early American imperialism, which weren't nearly as egregious as post-1945 American imperialism, that unfortunately has always been baked into the system from at least the way I see it.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And I think that it's hard to say, because the one end, you know, you don't exactly want to chide people that agree with you mostly. You don't exactly want to like put yourself out there in such a way, but at the same time, it's like the whole like blaming Europe for everything, and it's like, why'd they let this get so bad? It's like, why did the American people let it get so bad at the same time? You know what I mean? Like, I hate to say it, like, I know that I have immense disagreements with him on like a lot of issues, but unironically, I think Eric Stryker has had the most sober head about this. Where
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, he said he was arguing on the Telegram, that he's like, you know, the reason that the Kremlin would potentially fund like weirdo like Haas cells or like La 90 IQ Red Scare people that like, you know, emphatically worship whatever, like Dasha, like the reason they'll fund like these strange like tanky LARPer socialists instead of like dissident right wingers in America, like, you know, the reason that they'll fund these people instead of like Hazoning Akon, whatever, to be like, you know, create an anti-Ukrainian bloc in the dissident right, is because Eric Stryker said the reality is that the Kremlin probably knows that the dissident right is composed of like fair weather spurgs and cloud chasers and people that like, as soon as like
the Gladio right.
The Gladio right, yeah. As soon as like any little offensive is taken by Ukraine and the Russians have egg on their face and they'll like literally believe in like Western media propaganda, it's like, oh, it's all over. Fukuyama's right. The GAE is here forever. We might as well just like give up now. It's like, well, or we might as well just have a slice of the pie as Americans in the GAE, even though you're not going to, because the people that are going to get the slice of the pie, not
are
going to
your
be
replacements.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It'll be the mulata. It'll be the Lizzo Americans, in other words, that'll get the slice of the pie. It won't be you. It will be like the racially ambiguous gold-skinned girl that works for the State Department that's going to get the slice of the pie, not you, who is in Appalachia or in like northern cities, like post-industrial Americana. No, like those heritage Americans are not going to benefit from this. So, as much as I want to like be charitable to American friends, and I don't want to go like full on academic agent, like, you know, America is the gamer word nation. Like, I think that you have to like come to the reality that this does not benefit you. And the fact that you're willing to blackpill over the most innocuous thing that your enemies that hate you say about the situation on the ground is really quite stunning. I hate to say it. And maybe that's just because I'm like coping and seething or whatever, but you know, the fact that like you're making me side with Eric Stryker is really something, you know what I mean?
Well,
but,
I
like,
mean, in
you gotta give credit
January,
where it's due, and I don't agree with Eric Stryker on a lot of things, but you know, he's like, he even said the other day on Telegram, he's like, oh, they got a few cow patty territories. Oh, that means I'm gonna have to change my whole worldview now. It's like, that's, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, yeah. Sorry, I'm just ranting incoherently. I don't want to offend people, but it's like that's how I feel deep down. It's like the whole like the Richard Hanania take of like, well, Fukuyama is right and America's the strongest it's ever been. And it's like, you know, people, right wingers that say that, you might as well just go take your kid to the gender clinic right now. You might as well just take your kid to the Pritzker Institute. If that's the case, that this thing is going to last forever and there's no hope, and that come the midterms, you're going to be crushed. You know what I mean? Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
I'm getting mad right now.
Part of the support, and I said this back in January, is part of it is pride, right? Like, let's fix America, but America still has to rule the world. It's just the America that we want. Because of course they can't accept that fixing America would mean losing hegemony first, because it won't happen any other way.
Bear in mind a hegemony that presents no benefit to them at all, but they still feel a sentimental attachment towards.
Yeah, honestly, it is a cope. it is how they forget about their present situation and their powerlessness. Now, you could argue, well, you're just rooting for the opposite team, or you're still on the sidelines rooting. You don't have any direct involvement in the outcome. But the point is, right, politically, what you want is a regime that is destabilized and is making mistakes. In the short term, make no mistake that if America is not successful, Europe and America are going to really, really clamp down, right? And I think some,
Oh, they'll have to destroy dissident right groups. They'll have to.
Yeah. And in some ways, gladio right wingers, they're ahead of the curve. Like they, whether they anticipate it or not, they're more prepared for that. But they will be expendable too, in the same way that the author of Rowling, J.K. Rowling, you know, like yeah, we appreciate
Führer of the youth, J.K. Rowling now.
Yeah, but you know, it's like they're an ally, but not really.
They're like the Rad Femmes. They're like the Rad Femmes, or the
yeah. So yeah, anything that like literally destabilizes the gay is ultimately good, even if the short term could be very difficult, right?
Yeah.
That's very easy to understand. It doesn't matter who destabilizes it, right? That's not relevant. It's not important. And besides, like, okay, the gay has never been more popular, stronger, let's say. It's not popular, it's just stronger. But it had to destroy its allies in order to get there.
Yeah.
Like, ultimately, that's what that means. And as I said earlier in the show, it will be more difficult to fund NATO that way, right? It will just have to keep finding new willing participants. Now, you know, you brought up some topics that I think reflect on Putin's speech. And there were several times in the speech where Putin is, like, for all his talk about colonialism, so he divided the speech into two. I mean, he talked about many things, including like why we fight and so on. He addressed the integration of the four regions into Russia, and you know what Russia's obligation is to them. But along the way, he kept making references about the real owner, the mask falling off. Okay, so the first one, he's talking about Zelensky and, you know, the neo-Nazi guys who are around him. Like, for some reason, the neo-Nazi guys, like, they're getting billions of dollars, but they won't assassinate Zelensky. Weird.
Hold on, let me get the famous image up. Okay, there we go. Continue, please.
Right. So,
because if Right Sector wanted to get rid of him, they could.
No, Right Sector will never do it. Some of the other, but not Right Sector.
Maybe
and if you want some reference,
it's because I mean, to be honest, like Ukrainian nationalist groups have worked with Jews before, even during World War II. Then they turned on them, but like it's not like that. That's not part of their history. Anyhow, now he mentions who really controls these groups, right? Then he brought up, for instance, how everyone is forced to give up their sovereignty in order to invest in this parasitic system, which he later created in some ways even more controversy by saying, when he's talking about this system, by saying who the real owners are. Who are the real owners of this system? Because if this system isn't going to be invested in, it will be crushed. And the real owners of the system are absolutely invested in it. This absolutely will be, like, I've already seen articles that this speech was anti-Semitic, and to a degree,
Of course, yeah. Of
it
course.
was, right? Like Israel literally is pleading with Russia for Russia to use larger jets so it can fit more Jews in Russia who want to leave to get out, right? Particularly after conscription, right? And really, like, I mean, for them, there's nothing to gain. Like, they're not going to have their way, so they see no point in staying there, and they're certainly not going to die for a country
I'm
that they
dying
don't.
for Russia? Are you kidding? Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding, right? So they're not going to do it, and so I thought that was interesting, and of course, he addressed like neoliberalism, which isn't to be confused with like, I don't know, the liberal, sorry, neocolonialism. I'm sorry, which isn't, you're not supposed to really. He's not really talking about French colonies, English colonies, Portuguese colonies, Spanish colonies.
He's talking
That's
about
not
the 1990s.
He's talking mostly post World War II America. That's what he's really talking about, right? He does address the other ones, yes, but he has a very large audience, and some of those groups in the audience are at loggerheads with one another. So yes, some of the audience is the global South, but he also condemns America and the West for basically not representing their own people. He brought up again the he said it before, the locking up of dissidents in America, and that America doesn't have the best interest of its citizens, and so on.
No, but see, the thing is, a lot of dissident right wingers, they ignored that part, that he was talking about them. He was talking about that thing that happened at the Capitol. Like, at the one end, I know that American, like heritage American people in the political right, they're like absolutely sick of hearing like slavery, slavery, this and that. Like, what's the thing? 1819, 1390. That project. What is it?
1350.
Yeah, I forget the 1519.
1619 is what it actually is, but I can throw out other 4-digit numbers while we're at it, but I'll refrain.
Yeah, 1588. So
Wait, well, okay,
like,
yeah.
no, it's like, oh my God, like, no, but I know that the right wing, they're like, they don't want to hear that, obviously, and they're like, but then in the same breath, in the same speech, Putin is like, not only are you responsible for like slavery and like all this, but you're also responsible for jailing right wingers just for their beliefs in America right now. So it's like that meme that someone posted, some like terrible journalist. I posted this cap of this journalist saying that Putin basically is accusing the West of being gay Austrian painters, and then I posted it next to it a screen cap of the Death in June Facebook post supporting.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
Putin has been reading.
But you know what I mean? Like, I understand they're tired of hearing.
Yeah, they are tired of hearing it. But like, he has to reach a much larger audience. Part of the reason he's addressing the right is because there is no one who's going to speak about the right on the world stage. That doesn't exist. He is the only leader who's going to do that. China's not going to do that. Maybe the closest thing that's ever, and even Iran, Ahmadinejad didn't do that. It is, you could argue it's a soft underbelly of the West right now. But as you see, as soon as the invasion of Ukraine took place, half of them split, right? So it's not really, you can only invest in them so much, because as soon as like, you don't want a country that says we're going to nuke you and we're going to put nukes at the Munich conference this year in February. Like they're not solid, right? But he still is making appeals, and that it's pragmatic what he's doing, absolutely. But no one else is going to make those statements either. But my favorite part is when he talked about the system, how you're forced to de-sovereignize yourself, how the system needs new investment for it to survive. And then he says, because the real owners of the system, well, like, can't you just say the owners? The real owners of the system will, like, fight tooth and nail. I forget exactly what he said. That was, I think, for me, a very important line.
But who do you think he means by the real owners of the system?
Well, obviously, it's not Joe Biden.
No, I know, like, the meme, like, the speech is anti-Semitic, but it's like, does he think that, or because, like, the whole thing is that he had, like,
he has to know it. He has to know it.
No, but I mean, like, does he mean something higher, or does he just mean, like, because I know the whole, like, the like pro-Ukrainian dissident right argument is that one of his greatest mentors was Jewish, and, like, he, like, is not, he's, like, pro-Semitic, and he wanted to give relations.
So pro-Semitic. Yeah, they all left. He literally, he's so pro-Semitic. Yeah, I know.
Well, the chief rabbi of Moscow left, even though even though America, strange enough, doesn't have a chief rabbi, apparently. I know that not all.
No, but Biden bragged that he goes to shul more than the average Jew. Wow. He celebrated a Jewish holiday this week. That's where he said what he said, right? It's just, I mean, I think you could have one kind of opinion about Putin prior to the war. I think that opinion has to be modified after the war. And I will say that I think Putin absolutely knows, that they have overwhelming control. I mean, the bottom line is they're going to get upset because he's going to be arguing for sovereignty.
Right.
That's the bottom line. That in and of itself is an anti-Semitic slur.
Yeah. He could be meaning, like, Satan or some other higher force. But
no, I don't think so.
He was clearly referencing the Freemasons.
Maybe.
No, he meant the Mormons. No, I mean, there were elements in the speech where he talked about, the West wanting to upheaval and flip on its head. Again, I'm paraphrasing. That's not what he said exactly. But he literally said, it's satanic. This is a satanic system.
Yeah.
That will resonate with literally just about anybody who doesn't want the gay.
But apparently invoking any Christianography, like Satan, that itself is also anti-Semitic inherently. So you can never win.
Like, right, and he does have a point. He quotes from the Gospels, and he says, "By their fruits you shall know them."
Interesting.
Now, with that being said, I do have just a few more news items on Europe. So, the European Central Bank is concerned about potential waves of defaults of several other banks within the next few months. Belgium has abstained from the sanctions, as you had mentioned previously. And then there were a few more interesting developments within Central and Eastern Europe, starting with Hungary has dedicated to the increase of security of the Turk Stream pipeline, fearing a similar sabotage effort will take place that took place on Nord Stream in order to cut Hungary off from their energy. And this also comes as they were able to negotiate a successful 6-month payment deferral with Gazprom regarding energy prices, and they were able to secure Hungary's energy supplies for the winter. And you also have Hungary, along with Turkey, serving as the roadblocks in order to prevent NATO expansion to both Finland and Sweden. Now, of course, the question of NATO expansion to Ukraine was on the table about a week and a half ago. That has been just shelved thus far. They haven't touched that, and they have about 9 members supporting the U.S. and various coalitions of Eastern European statelets supporting Ukrainian NATO membership, but that has been stalled for now. Gazprom has also told Moldova that they would be able to spend energy transfer at really any time they please. You had on Gazprom News, a brief shutdown of gas flowing to Austria and Italy that was very quickly restored, and that was about a week after the Nord Stream incident. And let's see here. The other big news that was out of Eastern Europe is Bulgaria has said that they're no longer going to be supplying heavy weapons to Ukraine. And then after that, one of their largest munitions factory, Arsenal, actually did have an explosion. So Bulgaria is unique when it comes to supplying weapons to Ukraine because they're one of the last countries that manufactures certain Soviet pieces and Soviet calibers that they use for their heavy weapons in particular. So they've been cut off by that. So a lot of people are speculating that the Ukrainians are going to run into a bit of a supply crunch come winter, especially considering the situation in Europe and the very dire conditions that they may be in come January, February, maybe even a bit later. I still hold to my prediction that this winter won't necessarily be the bad one, but the following year, the fallout from said winter is going to be worse, and then winter 2023, 2024 is likely when they're going to get hit even harder with that. So I'm in a bit of an unpopular position where I say that I don't think this winter is going to be good by any means, but it's certainly not the worst that they're going to see. And you have, on the similar vein, France saying if we all just cut back 10% of energy, then we'll be able to meet that. Although they have lost more than 10% of their energy, and it is just the problems do get exponentially larger as time goes on with that out of Europe, and there is the continuing spat between Greece and Turkey where the escalation continues further. Greece protested against an energy deal that Turkey had made with Libya, and that harkens back to the 2020 standoff where you had one of the more interesting alignments in Europe where it was France and Russia finding common cause on preventing Turkish intervention into Libya regarding the energy markets and Turkish expansion. So there is potential that does flare up again, and we've discussed for years on this show that Turkey is the linchpin of NATO. And if there's going to be anything that could fracture NATO, it's going to be something that Turkey does, which I don't think it'll be the case right now, considering the larger issues at hand. But it is inevitable that something happens between Greece and Turkey, something happens between Turkey and France. But the linchpin on which NATO sits is very fragile, and unless they find a very quick and hard solution to the Turkish problem, it's going to boil over eventually. Within the next few years, and on top of that, you already have the increase of a Turkish presence in the occupied parts of Cyprus, so people do fear that there may be an escalation on the horizon. However, I have said thus far, and GSP has also said even more than me, that any sort of demands Turkey would have of Greece, of whoever else in NATO, they're going to get what they want for the time being because NATO will pressure whatever small statelet is being pushed around by Turkey into conceding what they want because of how important of a linchpin it is. And that will encourage Erdogan to push his luck further and further, hence ballooning over the situation, in which case I'm starting to see in this situation there's rapidly deteriorating chance of a political solution coming about, and it probably will come to force of arms much sooner than later. Not to give it too hard of a prediction because I know I have a tendency to underestimate these things that tend to happen sooner than I say they will, but we almost certainly will see at least a brief war before the end of the decade between Greece and Turkey, or Turkey and Cyprus, or some combination thereof, because the situation is, it's simply not sustainable. there was a very small diplomatic window on this, but the very small window that was there is now rapidly closing, and I would say is almost closed insofar as that's concerned, which would be, once again, just another element of instability in Europe. And that's on top of the regular flows of migrants, which are certain to continue once Turkey does need to strong arm the West again. They haven't forgotten about this. They still have millions of migrants that they can send into Europe at just about any point, and maybe it'll be this winter, maybe it'll be after this winter when they're really down and out, and Turkey can just kick them while they're down, really demand what last concessions they can squeeze out of them. So I what I'm getting at, just in brief, is there is great potential and, in my opinion, great possibility that there's an incident with Turkey within the next 2 to 5 years. I'll just put that time frame on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I just we're going to see, but I don't see how it will continue to go on. You're also seeing
Turkey has a sizable army, right? They have sizable forces.
They do, and it has not been that successful in Syria. And as long as I mention Syria, I just want to say an absolute first happened. Syrian forces got into a firefight with American forces and pushed them out of an area.
Yeah, but remember, these are the same real, greatest fighters in the world who destroyed 600 Wagner men with only 15 of them, had no air support, nothing, fighting with M1 Garands holding off an entire Wagner army.
Yeah, I heard about this. The Americans destroyed a Wagner unit. Is that true? Or is that
bullshit? They were an estimate of like 5 to 15 Wagner guys with about 200 Syrian soldiers.
Yeah, and
what they did was they used one of those airplane gunships.
Like an AC-130.
Yeah, and the reason they shot them is because they were fighting ISIS.
Oh man, they're the greatest ally. ISIS.
This is either the first or the second time that they lost Palermo, and it was probably would have been around 2016.
Yeah.
So that's what that's about, and McCain bragged about it. Anyways, McCain's in hell now. So
how's the weather down there?
I still won't forget Contbot when he did that Photoshop of McCain, this strong, it's indoors, this strong like camera lights focused on him, and the shadow is literally like a vampire.
Oh God, yeah.
It's so brilliant.
I forget who tweeted it. It may have been Evan, or it may have been oh God, it may have been the bureaucrat. Like, the greatest attribute of McCain was the brain cancer cell that killed him. Like, yeah. Oh man.
McCain's brain cancer is literally braver than the Marines.
Yeah, braver than the troops. Yeah.
He literally it had to die with him in order to accomplish the mission. And
you just hear like the Call of Duty like soap, like mission accomplished, boys. Like,
yeah. So yeah.
This was probably 2016, yeah, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I know that the Russians, I know Wagner and other Russian forces were given, like, the Spetsnaz were given, like, explicit orders not to fire on any American positions or else.
Yes, I remember this was actually in 2018, around actually the time of the first episode of the War Report, and this was, once again, one of those things where they had a small team of Wagner forces that were more or less, in that point, an advisory role to the Syrian forces that they were attached to.
Yeah.
And they got strafed from above, and people act like it was this guerrilla firefight where, again, the Americans didn't even have M1s. They had bolt-action Springfields and held off an entire army of Wagner men.
Yeah, it was Black Hawk Down all over again. It was, yeah. So, great victory. Because they speculate, actually, that they've run simulations of the best American soldiers versus either the GRU Spetsnaz or other paratroopers or special forces the Russians have, or even the Rescavati. and all the simulations didn't bode very well for America. But I mean, who knows? America, I think, has to admit that it has a huge manpower problem when it comes to its military. If you look at like current military recruits, I mean, we've all seen the pictures. I know that Spinach Bra posted that one that went viral of like, I mean, they're probably just gonna be pogues anyways, right? But still, I mean, not the finest specimens nowadays. Because I
Yeah.
think that it's not to say like Americans are stupid or whatever. It's not to say like this is not an anti-American point. This is rather just acknowledging that because the military in America, and veterans would be the first to tell you this, is become so bureaucratized that they literally believe in, I would say, a post-national model of what a military looks like. A military is a bureaucratic force. It's not this warrior class. It's not the ethos of the Marines or whatever. It's not.
I'm glad you had
Yeah.
brought that up because
Yeah,
it is
go
one
ahead,
of those
Austin.
things where the American military doctrine, I would say at least post 2000, at least post 1991. I'll put end of the Cold War, just solid date. Where they did need to do missions like Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever for imperial interests, the primary goal of the military post Cold War was that of a global occupation force as opposed to an actual fighting force that was ever going to have to fight another
Yeah.
peer army, because at that point nobody would have expected war with China, and nobody would have expected war with Russia. So they started to bureaucratize again. They started to turn it into like a global police and management force. Like, yeah, what do you think the purpose of the military base in Germany are? What do you think the purpose of the military base in Japan are? And it is interesting because you brought up some of the squad v squad things, some of the special forces comparisons. Well, one thing that I've been a stickler on since 2018, once again, is that the two war game simulations of a naval battle in the Baltic Sea and a naval battle in the South China Sea both saw the U.S. Navy losing handily to Russia and China, respectively.
I mean, okay. And these are American simulations, and I've heard similar
Yeah.
outcomes. Persian Gulf, there could be truth to it. But I think it's just too tempting for them to use these war games in order to make the argument for more funding to the Pentagon.
I mean, there is
Oh,
always
true.
Yeah.
No, but I
But,
think that the training of an average Spetsnaz soldier is probably more than that of even a Navy SEAL nowadays.
I
Like,
have no idea. I mean, Wagner is doing. There are Spetsnaz in Ukraine, and Wagner is
Yeah.
doing incredibly well. Like they are outnumbered, and like they've cut off Bakhmut from two different sides. You know, if they could cut off from the north side, that would be even better. But I don't think they're going to go with that. I think they're going to basically hold them from the east and go up north, go from the south north. But you saw as soon as they entered the battle, they started making gains again. And again, the part of the reasons Russians have ceded so much territory is because they are outnumbered, so they constantly have to move troops here and there.
Now, one bit of transitory news I want to get in before we get into some of the OPEC stuff, or at least round out the OPEC stuff, and get into some of the news about Iran is I saw some interesting figures that compared debt to GDP ratios between Russia, the UK, EU, and the United States. So from lowest to highest is Russia at 19%, UK at 96%, EU at 100%, America at 137%. Now, the observation in this tweet also had pointed out that Sri Lanka's government completely imploded at 117%. Now, because of America's unique position when it comes to its role in the global economy, that being the head of the global economy, not all of the rules apply to them most of the time. However, again, there are just some laws of reality you simply can't skirt around. But they're able to weasel these ways. They're able to inflate themselves out of a depression, as we've seen time and time again. But it does bring up interesting questions for at least the European side of it, with the European Union at 100%, with the UK at 96%. You go into a lot of these European economies, especially in the PIGS countries that never really recovered from 2008, and then Germany, they're all pushing close to that 117 mark, and not that like that's a set mark in reality that government will collapse if you reach 117% debt to GDP ratio. But these numbers are becoming unsustainable for a country that isn't the global arbiter. It isn't the country that decides the rules for the global economy. And even then, you're still running into a lot of trouble when it comes to debt, inflation, interest, whatever. So after a certain point, again, no matter how powerful you are, you're still subject to the reality of the situation. But it does bring up some interesting figures, and I know it's not a pound for pound comparing Sri Lanka to even most European countries, but with all the factors combined, I will reiterate, I will say what virtually everyone has said. There's going to be something on the horizon. This isn't going to be one of those things that is shrugged off or something that they bounce back from. There will be a major change because of this. What that outcome will look like, your guess is as good as mine. The hope is that people more sympathetic to us would fill that void, but again, it's anyone's guess at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to add to that besides.
A simple, I agree, and thank you, Constantine. Your analysis is pristine and the best I've ever heard. That's the least you could do for me. But with all that being said,
an economic downturn again, like that was in 2008, or I don't know.
I mean, I'll be honest, and maybe this is just my more
We're in one.
Yeah, maybe this is just my more pessimistic side, but 2023 is going to make '08 look like child's play, and I would say we're verging on '08 levels right now. Things just haven't quite set into reality. Again, it took everyone until about 2009 to realize how disastrous 2008 was. That's just the way economies work. I'm no economics expert. In fact, you can look at my grades in my economic classes. They were average at best. I'm not too good with numbers. It comes to dyslexia. But with that being said, it's certain things are undeniable, even to the most layman analysis of economics, that I think calling it a recession is, once again, you look at the origin of the term, it is a cope term, so they didn't have to use the word depression after the Great Depression. And they're probably going to come up with some other cope term. You'll recall back in July, August, when they were saying, it's not a recession, we're just going to craftily, move this one here and call this and change the definition of that. When they were just janking around the definition of inflation, janking around the definition of recession. So, I mean, it's undeniable we are in one. There is negative economic growth, which, again, by their old definition, is a recession. But we're going to see probably some of the most productive countries in Europe look like Spain, Greece, and Italy did in 2008.
Yeah, I mean, Alex Christoforou was talking about what it was like in 2010. And when Greece was going through its economic crisis, and Germany enforced its what's the term that they use? I want to say austerity, yeah. And he mentioned thousands of people committed suicide. They lost their homes. In a country like Greece, where the home is passed down generation after generation, losing a home, right? And one of the things I also like in my travels through Eastern Europe, I did see less homelessness than I see in Canada, and part of that is that the family unit is more relied upon, and there is a house that, if nothing else, you have shelter.
Look, I know it's become a bit of a meme and a joke at this point, but the Hajnal line is real. There are those cultures in Southern and Eastern Europe that still do function
100%.
with those massive extended family units where you do usually have somebody to fall back on, whether that's your parents, a cousin, grandparent, whoever.
Yeah. And, a lot of Northwestern Europe doesn't have that. The family ties aren't as strong. Many people don't even own their own house. And it's very hard to reintegrate again. So the test will be on a social level as well. I imagine we're going to see a lot more homelessness than we've seen before. we're probably going to see more hostility because Britain, for some reason, thinks it's still okay to take in on a daily basis hundreds of migrants that it provides hotel rooms for. They have showers, free food.
Oh, just like Canada.
Yeah.
Exactly how much of a tan do I need to get on in this grift is what I need to know.
Right. Show up on the dinghy in Lake Erie. Pretend you
Hola, senor.
like just araba.
What is Mississauga?
Thank you, USA. So, yeah, I've said it before on this show, but a children of men scenario in Europe, that's a possibility. So, yeah, I mean that really hit home. To hear the thousand, you had children being left for adoption on the streets. I kid you not. As I said, thousands of suicides. And in a way, it's broken the spirit. Like you talked earlier about how Turkey can mistreat and essentially ridicule Greece on the geopolitical stage because it knows what a strong hand it has. And people, entire societies can become completely demoralized. But I just want to say that the demoralization process happened in Greece by the economic austerity program and the failure of its politicians, because it looked like they might win out, and they didn't, right? Because that's how loyal the elites are. And let's not forget, the EU was an American and British project, the funding for it and so on. So
the architects were of a certain American stock.
You could have said no, Europores. It's all your fault.
But then didn't Greece elect? It's all your fault. But didn't Greece elect Syriza after the Socialist Party? Yeah.
Yes.
Did that work, or is Greece still in the?
No, Greece is.
Oh yeah, it's
Greece. Someone asked because I brought up, like I said, what Germany did to Greece, America is going to do to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
They said, "Do you think Greece will get out of the EU?" I go, "What? Greece isn't going to get out of the EU.
I mean,
the EU will have to collapse. That's how it will get out of the EU."
They had a vote like Grexit. I don't know if any of you remember that. Believe it or not, that was actually one of my political awakenings. I know that's probably very uncommon in these circles because you talk to a lot of people. A lot of it's Trump. A lot of it's like whatever. But I remember one of the first issues I really had political awareness on was like, it seems like the Germans are really trying to squeeze every penny they can out of the Greeks mercilessly. And I remember actually keeping up with the Grexit vote for some reason. And I mean, once that failed, and again they went through Syriza, and I remember there was the case where the prime minister, whatever his name was, I think it was Spears at the time, resigned 30 days in, and then actually got himself reelected in like a new coalition. The way parliamentary politics tends to go when, let's just say, applied outside of the British Isles. But, and again, they believe it was 2019, 2020, sometimes within the past couple of years, they elected their standard establishment right-wing party, which did provide a touch of relief, but could that be attributed to them? That's really debatable. But once again, that situation on the border has only gotten worse. It's expanded to the point where Bulgaria was involved in the last stand down, actually in January 2020. In the part of 2020 that wasn't completely dominated by one of three narratives, that being the election convid and, of course, the, let's just say, Summer of Love 2.0. But yeah, I thought that was going to be the I thought that was going to be the
Summer
big
Pink
issue.
Floyd tour.
I thought that was going to be the big issue of 2020, is that we were finally going to get yet another powder keg in the Balkans, as it were. It turns out that was probably one of the worst predictions of the year. I'm glad I never went on record with that, but it all I mean, it's just been these small things just consistently piled on top of each other to the point like it's reached a breaking point. And I know you brought up the way a lot of the economic situation played out in southern and eastern Europe, and how a lot of people were able to fall back on their extended families, and despite that there were still a lot of deaths of despair, and that a lot of those social support networks don't necessarily exist in northwestern Europe.
Mhm.
Now, what I will also say on top of that, I know I compared it to what 2008 was for southern Europe, 2023 will be for northern Europe, and I might be pushing the envelope a bit here, but I mean, you could argue it could be a Soviet bloc post 1991 scenario in some of these Western European countries.
Oh yeah.
Oh God!
I mean, I
Can
think
you
it's interesting.
imagine?
Finland has built a wall, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, it's not really like Russia building a wall in Germany during the Soviet era, but I don't know the way these things can, the way they can flip. They, European governments may get to a point where they don't want people to flee. You know, of course, where are they going to flee to? I mean, the global South isn't going to take them. Maybe Argentina. I don't know.
I won't
They're
say who,
probably.
but I was talking to a German who said that uh, this particular individual I was talking to, as well as people this individual knows, are considering Norway as a destination because it is, as far as
Mm,
European standards are concerned, energy self-sufficient. And it looks like those are really the only places that professionals can go and actually build a life. And again, this person I was talking to was considering moving there for a few years and waiting out the situation. So it does look like Norway is a popular destination, and I know the energy crisis doesn't quite play out the same, but in terms of not being in the European Union, we could see Switzerland as well. But apparently, I think for actual, just say, upwardly mobile for the time being Europeans, Norway is probably going to be a pretty popular destination. And again, I'm basing this on just one individual I talked to. I don't have any numbers to back it up, but
it sounds
yeah,
reasonable.
it does sound reasonable. I could imagine a lot of Germans, Dutch, Danish, Brits, whoever, trying to emigrate to Norway.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I never understood in Children of Men why, when the fertility crisis happened, there was mass immigration everywhere. What was that about? I forget. It's been a while since I watched it.
I don't know if they ever clarified that.
Yeah. I guess people were trying to before they fade out into the Thomas Ligotti oblivion of not having children, maybe they just wanted a better life temporarily. Maybe that could be it. I don't know. I have to look into it.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be a reasonable motive. I mean, it's been years since I saw it, and one thing Zizek was right. The value of that film is really everything that's happening in the background, not the the plot. Yeah.
But do you think that Britain could potentially see what things were like in the 70s and 80s, with these vicious youth gangs and paramilitary groups, and
At the very least.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But then the theory goes is that basically the way it works is America. This is what. Who said this? Was this Gonzalo Lira? Was it McCoy? Basically, America will throw continental Europe under the bus first, and then Britain will be saved for after when things get desperate. Because Britain still is our little wholesome Chungus originary place that we have to preserve because they're Anglos or whatever. That's
right.
But Germanics and French and Italians and Bulgars and Greeks, they could go fuck themselves more or less. So I mean, yeah, it's it's a hard situation to contemplate, actually. I mean, I think the vast majority of people in Britain, because of the media, because of this narrative with Ukraine, they don't know, I think, what's coming really necessarily. They know politically that things are corrupt and that the Conservative Party, the Tories can't do anything, and that, Liz Truss is more of the same. But I don't think that, because again, I think when you have these scenarios with poverty or with standard of living dropping, Britain has a similar culture of snarky, ironoid leftists that America does. They have a different variety of it, but you will have.
It's like the worst fusion of the American and Canadian elements of that.
Yes, 100%. So you will have Owen Jones writing articles in The Guardian saying that I guess the chuds, the little Englanders, can't have their treats anymore. You'll have that, but unironically, you'll have that. And you'll have I know that we're turning into a third world country, but at least if the third world keeps coming here, then we're compassionate and we're saving them. And the chuds in Little England and fucking Somerset and in certain parts of London that are becoming uninhabitable, that they have to shut up, and that's their racism or that's their colonialist sort of remnant.
I think if we're really going to see England, Britain devolve into levels far more stringent than the 70s, far more economically dire, nobody's going to be writing articles like that. I mean, it'll just,
oh my god,
I think it'll just become impossible. I wouldn't doubt that some of these journalists will be beaten up.
Imagine a bunch of North FCs going after Owen Jones like that.
I'm just saying, if you're starving, right? If
you're not going to hear Saka Kar or whatever her name is, Ash Sarkar, talking about how racist you are. Yeah.
Right. I've often said liberalism is kind of like the ideology of affluence.
Yeah.
To a great degree. And, scarcity has a way of revealing a hierarchy. Who knows? Maybe a new hierarchy will arise.
Once again, something we've hammered on is that the West didn't become rich through its liberal values. It embraced the liberal values because it had the wealth and luxury to explore these ideas. But when push comes to shove, when it's crunch time, these ideas go out the window. We even have examples of this in, I would say, recent history, if you want to consider the 30s and 40s recent history, where you look at the operation of the United States government, you look at the operations of the UK government, they were just autocratic as Germany or the Soviet Union at the time. But yeah,
sometimes more so, actually.
Absolutely. And when push comes to shove, everyone knows it's time to pack up liberalism, because at the end of the day, it's just a fun thought experiment. None of these principles can survive any great amount of pressure.
Yeah.
Right. And part of liberalism is, of course, to tap down on nationalism. And you only allow that beast to come out in order to save the society. And then as soon as you've won, that beast has to be packed up. Right.
This is why gladio conservatives are wholesome Chungus nationalists, as I call them.
Yeah.
That's especially if you've come from a group that has been subjugated to a greater power, like the Irish, the Ukrainians, or various other ones. That is advantageous to the regime to cultivate that hatred for a variety of reasons. Right. Yeah, but like you were saying, that's gladio conservatism in a nutshell. It's I love it. I can't get over the term. I have to write an article now. We should formulate one on gladio conservatism.
Well, that was Constantine's. He came up with that.
Yeah. DM me a basic outline, then I'll put some purple prose to it.
Okay, I'll get on that eventually. Be warned, I'm not the most consistent person. So if you have to pester me a bit, don't worry, I'll eventually do it.
Yeah, because I have it in my mind, the outline of gladio conservatism, but I think it is quite interesting. One question I would say is what would the political right do in the situation of mass poverty and because I know the bullshit commie nonsense of fascism is capitalism in decay. It's yeah. Right.
I mean,
they only destroyed
America's working on something right now. Infrared Haas.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. MAGA
Right,
communism.
MAGA communism.
Yeah.
I was doing screen caps. I was in the stream chat, and I'm using the clapping hands, and it's Trump is an unconscious Marxist.
Yeah, I think it was either Smeedy on Twitter or was it Evan that said that like literal like 90 IQ MAGA communists like, well, I guess we all have working class interests now. like like that's the release valve. Maybe MAGA communism's like the release valve. That's why like
Yeah.
yeah, because they don't want anything like explicitly more right wing than that. I mean, that's why the post left experiment failed, because a lot of them just became right wingers. But I think like when it comes to the European New Right, I mean, yeah, in some ways, a lot of them have sold their souls to go against Russia, but like VAP talks about this. But I think that in times of great desperation, I think a lot of groups are going to have to like, are they just larpers and intellectuals? Are they going like, are they actually serious about reforming what is left of the European spirit? I think that's going to be a big question. And I think that the time for action, unfortunately, might be over, because the leadership of European countries have largely just suited their authority to America. And I know that Americans, the talking point that I've seen in response to academic engagement is that, well, these Europores, how dare they like grovel because they benefited from, and yes, it's true, they have been complacent and they have benefited from the American security state and they've reaped the benefits for themselves. But that time is over.
But those
And
are
if you truly
collaborators.
are of European descent and care about Europeans.
As if
Sorry, I'm
as
just
if they
Constantine.
as if they've had a choice, though.
Yeah.
As if they've had a choice to like, I'll be honest with you. I'm actually astonished how long America has allowed Germany to to have been
Yeah.
up until now, like, industry, to have an industry. Britain wasn't allowed that. A lot of them weren't allowed that. As soon as the Americans knew that they were going to win or had won the Cold War, that's it. All the factories went offshore. Right? As soon as that happened, it's like, man, we've been paying you guys too well. Cold War's over. We don't have to win. We don't have to win your favors anymore.
That's it, boys. We're done. Did our job.
Yeah.
Russia's
So
gonna break apart. Yeah.
I think in many ways, Germany was saved from that for the longest time.
Yeah.
Because Europe still had to be viable, partly because I think of geopolitical wargaming, that Russia posed a threat. But as soon as this war opened up and the pipelines were blown up, it's obvious now. We can pack them up, and maybe the companies there will find a home in China, maybe in America, but it's done.
Yeah, and the thing is, even about, for example, going back on the Minsk agreement and sacrificing stability in the region for American interests. Like, this has happened before. This was who's the guy that did the documentary in Serbia that the Duran interviewed? I think you sent me his documentary.
Yeah, I know who it is.
Yeah.
I forget his name. He's a ski, not an itch.
Yeah. He pointed out an interesting tidbit that back in, I was only 1 year old, I think, back in 93. Oh no, this is before. This is 1990. I was not even conceived yet. This was, how many people have died in the Balkan Wars? How many thousands of people died, right? Goran, how many?
I'm guessing like over 80,000.
Yeah, maybe more, because we truly don't know. I mean, they're still discovering mass graves and all that. So in 1990, they went to, was it Spain or was it somewhere else, where all three of the Balkan nations, the head of, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, was it Croatia? Yeah.
Sorry, I might be wrong on 80,000. I think that's high. I was thinking the 80 days of bombing of Belgrade. I got mixed up. Sorry.
Yeah, I think all the Serbian war, it's got to be over 100,000 at least. Like
Maybe.
that's, yeah. So there was a moment where they were going to sign an agreement right when Croatia, I believe, seceded. Now, Congressman Zellman, who is the
we talked about this on the show years ago.
the liaison to Bosnia,
Yep.
said to the Bosnian ambassador, "Hey, if you don't like the agreement, you could just not sign it." And it's like, well, he didn't sign it, and thousands upon thousands of people died, and the Balkans were never the same again. And that was essentially because, and I truly believe this, that a lot of the blood of the Balkans was probably laid on the America's hands, and the American government. And that is just and so what did Boris Johnson, and I'm sure Victoria Nuland and others in the State Department, what did they say to Zelensky after Minsk? If you don't like the deal, you don't got to take it. It's like, well, yeah. So this is a pattern. And of course, this documentarian is saying that that was the pattern that was set out. The same pattern against Serbia is now being deployed in Iraq. It was deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now it's deployed in Russia. So it's like, this is evil. He is the next Austrian painter, or rather Rasputin, Putler is the next Slobodan Milosevic, sorry. And it's like, this is the consistent pattern of the GAE. It's like, well, the allies that are signing an agreement, if you don't like it, you don't have to sign it. And it's like, well, even though thousands of people will die, it's like that is the, yeah. I mean, if I go off, I'm just going to Fed post, but like, no, but like this truly monumental evil. It's one conversation between the Bosnian ambassador, and I'm not blaming Bosnia, by the way. I'm not saying the Bosnians were responsible. I'm not like overlooking the crimes that Serbians did. I'm not, you know what I mean? Obviously, but there
could have been a peaceful agreement.
Exactly. Thousands upon thousands of people didn't have to die and just get displaced from the region. I mean, Goran, I mean, there was a huge influx of Balkanoids coming even to Canada at the time.
Yeah.
Afterwards, right? So, I mean, there's a huge amount of Serbians where I live in Niagara, and that's they own all the strip clubs, by the way. But that's
based. No,
Bay Sundowner. But no, but a lot of them came in the middle to late 90s in Canada, the way that Ukrainians came historically to Canada. Like, this is, that's for a reason, obviously. And then what's really disgusting is that I remember back in the day, a lot of people blamed, like, inherently, if you come to Canada or America and you're Serbian, that means it's because you're fleeing a fucking Hague tribunal. It's like, no.
Right.
It's like people that come from South Africa and they get blamed for racism. It's like, do you know why they fled South Africa? Do you know why they fled Serbia? Like, honestly, it's just, it really upsets me, because it's like, I know people who are Serbians, I know people who are South Africans, and it's like, to say that, like, oh, that means you're escaping the Hague. It's like, fuck off. Like, it's just, it's
I love how it's America that perpetrates this idea about the World Court that it does not belong to.
Yeah, I wonder why.
Because it would, So it's a sham, right? It's a false neutral. It's a false neutral. It's not real.
I know that even Slobodan Milosevic said that. Like, he said he had somewhat of the case, but he knew that it was never going to get heard. And even his lawyers told him, it's like, you know what? You just better accept it, because they're not going to. It's no is not an answer.
Well, I mean, that's why Pralyak did what he did. He figured it would be more honorable to do away with himself than allow him to be dragged through that. Which, look, I'm not going to condone that kind of action just on moral grounds, but I could see how A could lead to B could lead to C.
Yeah, sovereign is he who is above the law.
Was that Carl Schmitt?
Yeah,
of course.
I'm paraphrasing, but essentially that's.
Yeah. No, it's true. I think, like, not
exception to the law. Exception to the law.
Yeah, like, again, I'm not condoning. I mean, let's face it.
Now we know.
Yeah, we know the paramilitary groups like the White Eagles and what they were doing in the Tigers. Like, I'm not saying, but I mean, for the audience, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm like, 100% like the Serbians did nothing wrong, but it's like you have to realize that there are greater nuances there. The same way that there's greater nuances with Ukraine. It's like most Western people do not understand this. They think that the narrative is cemented is that one day, for no reason at all, Russia decided to invade these sovereign territories in Ukraine, and for no reason, they just decided to do this,
Putin's
and
just
it
a
just came out at
madman.
random.
He's just lost all rationality, and it's their favorite thing that they go to anyone who deviates from their system, anyone who deviates from just being a regional manager and actually trying to run their country, is a madman, is a crackpot, is a despot, is a dictator.
Saddam Hussein,
blah,
it's
blah,
literally
blah,
the
blah,
same
blah,
moral
blah.
outrage every time. It's
It's
so pathetic.
No, it's not the logical conclusion of like Saddam wants to control those oil fields for obvious reasons. It's like, no, he's Austrian painter. Like, remember they had that post? They had the White House, they had like the poster where it was like Austrian painter, Stalin, and Saddam Hussein. Do you remember that? Oh my God.
Yeah, I know the one.
Yeah. The butcher of the Iraq. Like, he did butcher a lot of people, but like that's besides that's part for the course in the Middle East. I mean, come on. That's, but so I'm just going off right now. But no, no, but I get upset because I think that people that should know better do not know this. That's my greatest frustration. Like, and I think that the sort of apparatus of this sort of neo-religious media fervor towards this conflict, it really sort of cements this opinion that there are greater forces at play, and that I think that people know what's inevitable. There's going to be a multipolarity whether you like it or not. And I think that America entering a post-American century is terrifying to many people for obvious reasons.
Oh yeah.
But I think that Americans have a choice, not their government, because we know what the government is going to do, more or less. And I mentioned this on Twitter. I said that, is it possible that through political instability, America will have a slew of one-term presidents forever, or will they just have like a one-party state, more or less? Right? Like, what is the alternative? I think that the American people...
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You'll have even presidents that don't truly fulfill their term, right? Like, that's only happened a few times. I believe, McKinley was assassinated. Kennedy was assassinated. Did Nixon serve his full term? No?
He served almost all of his second, but he was reelected to serve one full term. There was that one, I can't remember who it was, but it was all the way back, like mid-1800s, pre-Civil War, of the one who succumbed to illness 30 days in office. And I mean, given the age of our political elite, that actually isn't out of the possibility that, like, I mean, they only get older and older. Our presidents are only getting older and older at this point, and you don't really see a fresh crop from the younger generation coming to replace them. So it could be a full-on Soviet gerontocracy at that rate.
Goran, you remember, like, in the 80s, it seems that every single month was a Soviet state funeral, right? Like, it was... Yeah.
And then drop off. And I mean, I think what I'll say about, any potential Minecrafting of leaders going forward, whereas before, I think assassinating presidents in America either made no difference, actually strengthened America, and I'm speaking here in Machiavellian terms. I think if there are assassinations of U.S. presidents going forward, it'll have the opposite effect.
It'll weaken the American image.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Because you got to remember, like, Kennedy, the American, again, me and Cal were talking about this today, like the American state only became more stronger in Giga Chad after Kennedy. It really was the waning years of the Vietnam War and the social upheavals that struck a blow to its power. But, Kennedy was a positive for the deep state at the time.
Not to mention the cults of personality they can create around people like Kennedy that still go on to this day.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And also the fact that Johnson who I think, in my opinion, was one of the worst American presidents ever, had this like strange, like, he's a selfless bureaucrat that had to take up the reins after his best guy Kennedy died, even though he's probably involved. But it's like, the cult of Johnson as well became strengthened because he was like the selfless, totally selfless technocrat, that was going to mend America and like was going to push through a NAM, and that's a powerful image, right? It's almost like when a rock star dies and their bandmates get signed to another deal. Like it's
the American deep state will never stop thanking for allowing to kill Kennedy.
Yeah, but that's, no, Thomas 77 has a whole thing about when Kennedy was assassinated. He's got a whole thing about how
I like his content.
Oh yeah. He talks about like how it did strengthen the American deep state and how like, the whole thing that the Soviets killed him is kind of ridiculous.
But, it's so stupid.
Yeah. But it's just like, but say if a president, I don't know, say if Biden drops in 2023, say he succumbs to whatever horrendous demonic cancer is festering inside of his cavity. I wonder, like, what do you think would happen? Like,
they'll go with Kamala.
Will they go with Kamala though, or will they have like weird state of exception?
They will, because they can because I think, especially shitlibs, they're very tied into the system. It doesn't matter to them if the leader is stupid. They can make up fan fiction if they really have to. Right.
Kamala's a girl boss. Yeah.
No matter how much the right laughs at it, like at the end of the day, they're in charge, and that's what matters. So they're very pragmatic.
Yeah.
They're very Machiavellian about it.
Yeah, then if worse comes to worse, they can always just tag along Newsom in the VP slot. So like normal white guy, empowered strong woman of color, which is what they did in reverse order.
Newsom will be Newsom will be the first really handsome vice president of America.
Oh man. Al Gore was kind of handsome.
Yeah.
It was a bit,
Yeah.
You know who invented the
But
internet?
you know what, guys? It's getting kind of late.
Yes, it is. And although I did have a few items left, I suppose I can shelve those until next episode. But Geo, thank you once again for coming on. And if you have any new updates you would like to give our wonderful audience, now would be the time.
Oh yeah. Well, I just did a bunch of content on various places. Like, this week was the Digital Archipelago. Me and Prude covered the whole like weight discourse with Peter Thiel's dating app, Grinder. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean the right stuff. You know what the favorite tweet I saw was from Future Moldovan Citizen, where he's like, "Is there a gay equivalent called Countercurrents?"
He's brutal. He's very good. Yeah, him and I used to be. We're mutuals, but I can't post anything. But before, I think on my second ban after it sneaked in again. He's got good content.
Yeah, man. So we cover that. We also review the film 500 Days of Summer. Absolutely painful millennial film. Then like this week I also had Ace on. Speaking of Thomas 777, to talk about a concept we call a new age metal. So we cover a bunch of like influential albums from the 90s, like Roots from Sepultura, Focus is Cynic. Cynic album Focus. Yeah, that's a great one. Last week I did like a whole bunch of interviews like with Last Things, and I was on Restoring Order with Patrick Casey. So
yeah, that was very good.
Yeah, thank you. This week coming up, I probably will have another Stain Haynes interview. And the week after that, I'll probably release the So-So interview. So nice. Lots of great stuff. And I'll probably like have teaser clips, but I never get around to it because I'm always busy with everything else. So go to my Patreon.
You're very active.
Yeah, give this man your money.
Yeah, give me money or a manual typewriter.
Give me money or I kick Russia. I didn't know I could do a good Zelensky.
Oh
I-
yeah,
I-
when he speaks English. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought you were going for
Heimar,
Aristovich.
where's Heimar? What were you gonna say, Constantine? Sorry.
I thought he was going for an Aristovich impression based on what he said, but that's
Aristovich never speaks English ever.
Can you imagine?
He is such a
commend the man.
snob. I love it.
Can you imagine if Zhirinovsky was alive during the whole nuke discourse right now? Oh my-
Zhirinovsky would have asked for a knife fight with Zelensky at this point. He would have, unironically.
Yeah, unironic.
Let's settle this.
Oh man.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning into this little bit longer episode of the War Report, and thank you once again, Gio, for coming on. It's always
No
a treat.
problem.
It's always
Great pleasure to have you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
We always get
Pleasure to
these
be here.
very in-depth episodes, which I look forward certainly to more of those. But we will see you all next time, and goodbye.
Goodbye and take care.